The earth wore its scars like old soldiers wear medals, with a quiet pride that didn't quite mask the pain beneath. This was a world that had stared into the cosmic abyss so many times it had begun to recognize the faces staring back. The craters were smoothed over, the wreckage cleared, the memorials polished. But the psychic weight remained, a low-frequency hum in the collective consciousness of humanity. Victory was possible here. It had been proven time and again. But every victory left receipts, and the universe always collected. New York City, a perpetual epicenter of the extraordinary, moved with a rhythm born of resilience and weariness. Taxi drivers glanced at the skyline, not at its beauty, but checking for unfamiliar silhouettes. Office workers kept emergency kits under their desks, granola bars, bottled water, and for the particularly pragmatic, radiation pills. The Avengers were celebrities, yes, but also omens. Their presence meant something was wrong. Their victory meant something had been lost. Tony Stark's brilliant new Stark Tower, a gleaming spire of glass and promise, stood not far from the memorial park where names were etched in stone, a silent dialogue between aspiration and memory. Over the Pacific, the water was calm. The S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier resolute cut through the swells, a floating fortress of paranoid preparedness. On the bridge, Nick Fury watched a bank of monitors, his single eye missing nothing. The world was in one of its rare, fragile, quiet periods. The blip was 5 years past, but its ghost lingered in every census, every empty seat at a dinner table. The battle against Thanos had been won, but the cost had been tallied in a currency more precious than titanium: trust, certainty, the simple idea that the good guys always find a way. "Report," Fury said, his voice a gravel road rumble. Maria Hill, ever efficient, scanned her console. "All sectors nominal, Director. Enhanced activity in the negative zone border is holding steady. Asgardian diplomatic channels are clear. Quantum fluctuations are within expected parameters after the last incursion." "Expected parameters," Fury repeated, the words tasting sour. "Keep me posted on anything unexpected." As if on cue, the air over the Central Pacific, 200 miles west of the Resolute, began to bleed. It didn't tear or explode or warp. It fractured. A spiderweb of crystalline light appeared in the sky, silent and precise, as if reality itself was a pane of glass being scored by a master glazier. There was no sound, no shockwave, just the light, spreading in a perfect circle nearly a mile in diameter. From the fracture, a gentle, pearlescent radiation spilled downward, not destructive, but profoundly disorienting. It tasted of ozone and something else, something fundamentally other. On the bridge, alarms chimed with a polite urgency. Hill's hands flew across her console. "Energy signature detected, bearing 270 Mark 15. It's not matching any known profile. Not Chitauri, not Dark Elf, not Celestial. Radiation is non-harmful, but causing widespread EM disruption. Satellites are going blind." Fury was already moving to the central holotank. "Get me the Avengers, and get us over there, now." At the newly reconstructed Avengers compound upstate, the alert sliced through the morning's fragile peace. Tony Stark was in his lab, elbow deep in the schematics for a next-generation nano-housing unit meant for displaced populations. The alert bloomed across his holographic displays, painted in urgent amber. "Boss, Frida Y. Kai, S voice, always calm, held a note of analytical curiosity. "Multispectral anomaly over the Pacific. S.H.I.E.L.D. is requesting consultation." Tony didn't look up from his work. Tell them to send a bill. We're not their cosmic weather station. It's reading as a localized reality fracture, sir. Similar to the Bifrost, but different, more controlled, and it's growing. That got his attention. He waved a hand, bringing the data stream front and center. His eyes, shadowed with the fatigue of a man trying to rebuild a universe, scanned the readings. Reality fracture. Great. Because we needed more of those. Origin point? Unknown. The fracture appears to be opening from the outside in, as if something is pressing through. A familiar, weary sigh escaped him. He tapped the comm bead in his ear. Cap, you getting this? Steve Rogers' voice came through, steady as bedrock. Just saw it. Fury's calling. You thinking hostile? Unknown variable, opening a door to our living room. What's your guess? I'm thinking we suit up. Better to have and not need. In the compound's common area, Thor Odinson was telling a story to a captive audience of one, Bruce Banner, who was listening with polite, slightly nervous interest. Thor's tales of Asgard's glory days had taken on a new, melancholic tone since the destruction of his home. He spoke of golden spires and mighty feasts with the fond grief of a man describing a lost loved one. The alert chimed on the wall monitors. Thor's storytelling ceased, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the image of the crystalline fracture. The Bifrost, and yet not. This is a crafted passage, deliberate. Bruce adjusted his glasses, peering at the energy readings. The quantum signature is all wrong. It's not generating a wormhole, it's bypassing dimensional walls altogether. That shouldn't be possible without catastrophic side effects. And yet, Thor said, hefting Stormbreaker from where it leaned against the sofa. There it is. In the New York sanctum, Dr. Stephen Strange felt it before he saw it. He was in the midst of a complex astral projection, mending a minor rift in the protective wards around the London sanctum. A sudden, violent, discordant note rang through the mystic harmonies of Earth's dimensional membrane. It was a soundless shriek of wrongness. He snapped back into his physical form, gasping. The cloak of levitation, usually draped calmly over his shoulders, billowed out as if in a strong wind. Wong, he called out, already moving toward the central window that looked out over Bleecker Street. The view shimmered, replaced by a real-time scrying pool showing the Pacific fracture. Wong entered, a cup of tea in his hand. What now? Dormammu sending a fruit basket? Worse, Strange murmured, his hands already weaving diagnostic spells. Crimson threads of energy, intricate as lace, spun out from his fingers and into the ether, seeking the source of the disturbance. A dimensional incision, clean, surgical. Nothing natural makes a cut that precise. His mystical probes reached toward the fracture. They should have returned data, origin dimension, intent, magical composition. Instead, they returned static, a profound echoing null space in the tapestry of reality. It was like sending a sonar ping into the ocean and hearing nothing back, not even the seafloor. Strange's blood ran cold. That's impossible! On the deck of the Resolute, now positioned 5 miles from the anomaly, the Avengers assembled. Iron Man, repulsors humming a low idle. Captain America, shield strapped to his arm, his uniform seeming both archaic and timeless. Thor, Stormbreaker crackling with contained cosmic energy. Below, Black Widow and Hawkeye were prepping a Quinjet for close-range reconnaissance. They watched the fracture. It hung in the sky, beautiful and terrifying. The pearlescent light had coalesced into a shimmering pool, like mercury held in place by invisible forces. What's the play, Fury? Steve asked, his eyes never leaving the phenomenon. Containment and identification, Fury replied, his gaze fixed on the holotank. Hill's running every analysis we have. Until we know what that door is for, we don't go knocking. Tony's faceplate was up, his expression one of intense scientific scrutiny. The energy output is stable, too stable. It's not a natural phenomenon, it's a tool. Someone built a key for that door. Or something. Natasha's voice came over the comms from the Quinjet hangar. Then the pool rippled. It was a gentle disturbance at first, like a stone dropped into a still pond. Then it bulged outward, as if something was pushing against it from the other side. The shimmering surface stretched, distorted, and finally broke. A figure tumbled through. Not with the thunderous arrival of the Bifrost, not with the fiery crash of a meteor. It was a quiet, almost graceful expulsion, as if the universe had politely coughed. A man clad in blue and red, a red cape flowing behind him like a banner of blood. He fell, limbs loose, seemingly unconscious or disoriented, toward the churning ocean 1,000 feet below. Manifestation, Hill called out. Single humanoid entity. No life signs reading, wait, correcting. Life signs are fluctuating. Massive energy signature from the entity itself. Off the scale. Scramble rescue, Steve ordered instantly. But before the order could be executed, the fracture reacted to the passage. The clean, crystalline edges of the hole in reality frayed. The precise incision became a ragged wound, and from that wound, a feedback loop of chaotic energy vomited forth. It wasn't an attack, it was a hemorrhage. Raw, multicolored energy, part gamma, part cosmic, part something utterly alien, erupted in a lattice work of annihilation. It crackled and spread like lightning in reverse, coalescing into a deadly net that began to descend, not toward the helicarrier, but on a curving trajectory that would bring it down directly on the Marquesas Islands. Fury's holotank lit up with projected casualty reports. Population 12,000. Evacuation time impossible. Interception options limited. The energy lattice was too diffuse, too volatile. A missile strike would scatter it, potentially worsening the impact. Energy dampeners would be overwhelmed in seconds. The calculus of this universe, honed by tragedy, began its grim work. Fury's jaw tightened. The math was brutal but clear. The islands could not be saved. The priority shifted to containing the spread, to preventing the lattice from skipping to the next archipelago and the next. All assets target the energy phenomenon at its source, Fury said, his voice devoid of inflection. Attempt to collapse it before it makes landfall. Prepare casualty and containment reports for the Marquesas. Steve Rogers heard the order. He understood it. He had given similar ones. He still hated it. His grip on his shield tightened until the leather of his glove creaked. Tony Stark's faceplate snapped down. On it. Maybe I can shunt it into a containment field, buy some time. But they were all watching the falling man. He stopped falling. One moment he was a limp doll against the vast blue of sky and sea. The next, he was upright, suspended in midair. A hand went to his temple, fingers pressing against his brow as if fighting off a vicious migraine. He shook his head, blinked hard against the harsh sunlight. And then he saw it. His head turned, his gaze, even from a distance, those on the helicarrier could see it was startlingly blue, tracked the path of the cascading energy lattice. He saw the colorful, deadly net descending. He saw the faint thermal signatures of towns and villages on the islands below, the tiny pinpricks of life and warmth. His expression shifted. The pain and confusion vanished, replaced by a focus so absolute it was like watching a laser sight activate. His body straightened, his cape settling around him. He moved. It wasn't like Quicksilver's speed, which had been a blur of motion and displaced air. This was different. There was no blur. There was the man in one position, and then he simply was in another. It was so fast it bypassed perception and went straight to cognitive dissonance. One frame he was near the fracture. The next, he was inside the heart of the energy lattice. "He's in the kill zone," Hill reported, her voice rising in alarm. "Direct exposure. He'll be vaporized." But he wasn't. The lattice reacted to his presence, the chaotic energies arcing toward him, drawn to the massive power signature he represented. Lightning-like tendrils of destruction wrapped around his arms, his torso, crackling against the strange symbol on his chest, a stylized S inside a diamond-shaped shield. The fabric of his suit smoldered. His skin glowed with the absorbed fury. He didn't scream. He didn't strain against it. He began to work. His hands, glowing with trapped energy, moved in deliberate, careful arcs. He wasn't fighting the lattice. He was gathering it. With motions of profound delicacy, he began to pull the strands of annihilative force toward him, weaving them together, compressing the sprawling, miles-wide net into a smaller, denser ball of contained chaos around his own body. It was an act of impossible precision, like a bomb disposal expert, carefully clipping the right wire while the timer reads 1 second. On the helicarrier deck, the Avengers watched in stunned silence. "What in the name of Asgard?" Thor whispered, his grip on Stormbreaker slackening slightly. "He's not trying to destroy it." Bruce Banner's voice came over the comms, filled with scientific awe. He's harvesting it. The energy density around him is spiking into theoretical ranges. It should be tearing apart the local spacetime." "The energy has to go somewhere, Banner," Tony said, his sensors overloading with conflicting data. "He's not a battery, he's a funnel. But into what?" Superman's face was a mask of concentration. Veins stood out on his forehead. The symbol on his chest was now blazing like a small sun, absorbing the radiant fury. The lattice, which had been spreading, was now shrinking, drawn inexorably into the vortex he had become at its center. The air screamed with the sound of stressed reality. With a final, shuddering effort, he brought his hands together. The last rebellious strands of energy were forced into obedience. Where there had been a miles-wide net of death, there was now a single, seething sphere of compressed destruction held between his palms. It was small, no larger than a basketball, but it glowed with the malevolent light of a miniature star. He looked at it, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up through the still gaping, frayed dimensional fracture above him. He shot upward. The sonic boom that followed was an afterthought, a polite apology for the violence of his passage. He became a blue and red streak, a reverse meteor hurtling into the tear in reality. For a moment, he was silhouetted against the shimmering void. Then he hurled the sphere of energy deep into the darkness beyond. A distant, muffled whoomp echoed back, a sound felt in the bones more than heard by the ears. The fracture, deprived of the stabilizing energy feedback, shuddered. The crystalline edges lost their definition. It collapsed in on itself with a sound like a universe exhaling, sealing shut without a scar. The sky was just sky again. Silence, broken only by the Pacific wind and the low hum of the helicarrier's engines. Slowly, Superman descended. He landed not with a crash, but with a gentle touch, his boots coming to rest on the air itself, a dozen yards from the helicarrier's observation deck. He hovered there, a picture of quiet power. His suit was scorched in places, small tendrils of smoke rising from his cape. He looked tired. Not physically, but in the way of a man who has just shouldered a tremendous burden. He looked at the assembled heroes. He saw Captain America's shield, still held at the ready, a symbol of defense. He saw Iron Man's repulsors, still glowing with potential violence. He saw Black Widow, her body language poised between flight and fight, and Hawkeye, an arrow knocked but not drawn. He saw Thor, the god of thunder, regarding him with a mixture of wariness and profound curiosity. He saw their suspicion, a wall built not of malice, but of experience, battle-hardened, tragedy-tempered, scar-tissue readiness. He took a breath, his first deep breath of this new world's air. It tasted different. The salt of the sea was familiar. The ozone from the energy discharge was familiar. But beneath it was a flavor he couldn't quite place, a metallic tang of cosmic radiation, the psychic residue of unimaginable loss, the sour note of a universe that had learned the hard way that miracles come with invoices. He let the breath out. He offered them the only thing he had, the only thing he ever truly carried with him into any confrontation. He smiled. It was a small, weary, hopeful thing. "My name is Clark Kent," he said. His voice was calm, clear, and carried a surprising, disarming warmth. It was the voice of a neighbor offering to help with groceries, not a being who had just corralled a continent killer with his bare hands. "I'm not here to fight." The statement hung in the air, so simple it was disorienting. Tony Stark's faceplate retracted with a soft hiss. His expression was a masterpiece of conflicted genius, awe battling with deep, ingrained suspicion. "Yeah, we got that from the whole saving the islands routine. Color me impressed. Now color me curious. Clark Kent. From where exactly? And what's with the walking fusion reactor act?" Before Superman could answer, a new voice cut through the comms. It was sharp, clinical, and carried an edge of barely contained alarm. "Fury." Nick Fury didn't move his eye from the hovering man. "Strange. We're a little busy." "Listen to me very carefully." Dr. Strange's voice was a wire drawn taut. "The being with you. Do not let him out of your sight. Do not trust a word he says." On the deck, Steve Rogers' posture shifted imperceptibly, becoming more protective. "Doctor, he just saved thousands of lives. And he may have doomed all of reality in the process." Strange shot back, the sound of rustling pages and clinking artifacts in the background. "I have just performed every diagnostic spell in the Cagliostro manuscripts. I've scanned him with the Eye of Agamotto. I've consulted the Orb of Agamotto." "And?" Fury growled. "And nothing. He returns nothing. Every entity, from the lowliest dimensional parasite to the living tribunal, exists within the mystical ecology. They have a resonance, a signature, a place in the tapestry. He..." Strange's voice dropped, the horror in it palpable even over the comms. "He has no signature. He is not of the tapestry. He is a thread from another garment entirely, sewn into ours. His presence here is a paradox, a sustained, walking contradiction to the local laws of reality. He doesn't belong." The Avengers heard it. The science, the magic, the gut instinct of their commander, all converging on the same terrifying point: unknown, unprecedented, unnatural. Superman heard it too. His super hearing, still tuning to the frequencies of this new universe, had caught every whispered word from the sanctum, every sub-vocalization on the deck. The small, hopeful smile on his face didn't vanish, but it changed. It became sadder. The warmth in his blue eyes remained, but now it was the warmth of a campfire, seen from a very long, very cold distance. He had arrived as a savior. He had acted on the most fundamental principle of his being, to help. And in doing so, he had been identified not as a hero, but as an infection, a cosmic error, the ultimate outsider. He looked from face to face, Stark's skeptical genius, Roger's honorable caution, Thor's godly scrutiny, Fury's strategic paranoia. He saw no malice, only the hardened pragmatism of survivors. This was a world that had been saved by miracles and had learned to fear the bill that came after. He was hope incarnate, falling into a sky that had long since learned to expect the worst. "I understand your concern," Superman said, his voice still calm, but the loneliness in it now audible, a deep, resonant note beneath the strength. "I don't know how I came to be here, but I give you my word, all I want to do is help." Fury took a step forward, his eye like a black hole absorbing light. "Your word. We'll start with a full debrief, Mr. Kent, on our terms, in our facility." Superman nodded slowly. He had expected nothing less. "Of course." As two S.H.I.E.L.D. escorts in advanced armor approached cautiously, energy rifles held low but ready, Superman allowed himself one last look at the horizon. Somewhere out there, in the infinite sprawl of the multiverse, was a world with a red sun over a farm in Kansas, with a bustling newsroom in Metropolis, with a woman who loved him not in spite of his power, but for the man who wielded it. He was impossibly far from home. But below him, in the waters of this strange, scarred planet, life went on. People were alive who would have been dead. That, at least, was a language this universe understood. It was a place to start. He turned back to his escorts, his hands open at his sides, a gesture of peaceful surrender. The hope in his eyes was now a quiet, stubborn flame, sheltering against a cold wind of suspicion. The first chapter had closed. The story of what hope would cost in a world of sacrifice was just beginning. The journey to the Avengers compound was conducted in a state of profound, humming silence. He didn't resist, didn't question. The Quinjet's interior was lit by sterile blue-white light, and the agents, a mix of S.H.I.E.L.D. tactical and what he would learn were Tony Stark's private security, watched him with a vigilance that bordered on the religious. They weren't guarding a man, they were containing an event. Superman sat, his cape a splash of impossible color against the gunmetal gray, his gaze fixed not on his escorts, but on the world streaking by below, a world so like his own, yet vibrating with a different, more fractured frequency. He was taken not to a cell, nor to a guest suite, but to a specially prepared containment module within the compound's medical and research wing. The label on the file, he later learned, read, Asset K1, Origin Unknown, Status Quarantine. The walls were a transparent polymer, reinforced with a vibranium weave and crisscrossed by softly pulsing dampening fields designed to suppress anomalous energy signatures. It was a technological marvel, a cage built from the lessons of gods and monsters. Superman stepped inside without comment. He felt the faint tingle of the fields against his skin, a sensation like static on a dry day. He could have shattered the enclosure with a thought, but that was the entire point of the exercise, for them and for him. He would not. Instead, he sat on the provided cot, his cape pooling around him like liquid fabric, and he listened. His hearing, a sense he had learned to temper with the focus of a master musician tuning a symphony, expanded. It passed through the baffling fields. They could dampen energy, but not the fundamental vibrations of reality itself, and filled the compound. In the main lab, two voices, one sharp and wired, the other laced with a weary, cerebral anxiety, argued over scrolling holograms that depicted his own biology in screaming, impossible color. It makes no sense, Tony. Look at this cellular activity. They're like miniature Dyson spheres, but for sunlight. They absorb, store, and convert solar energy at nearly 100% efficiency. But the byproduct isn't heat waste. It's a form of photonic potential energy that reinforces cellular integrity. It's a perfect, clean burn. Bruce Banner's voice was a mixture of awe and profound terror. No gamma signature whatsoever. No arc reactor residue, no mutagenic markers. It's beyond stable. It's harmonious. It's like he's photosynthesizing righteousness. Tony Stark's reply was a scoff, but it was undercut by a layer of sheer intellectual frustration. Nothing photosynthesizes righteousness, Banner. There's always a trade-off, a metabolic pathway, a weakness, a flaw in the code. Keep looking. Run the spectrometry again. I want to know what happens when his sunlight runs out. In a curved hallway overlooking a training yard, two more voices, lower, grounded in a different kind of calculus. He saved thousands, Steve, without being asked, without a dossier, without extraction or support. The preliminary reports from Nairobi are calling it a miracle. Casualty count, 0. Structural damage from his intervention, also 0. Natasha Romanoff's tone was analytical, a mission report given voice. Steve Rogers' reply was quiet, burdened. I know, I saw the feeds. It was extraordinary. But Strange's warning isn't about his intentions, Nat. It's about his existence. He's a walking reality violation, a symbol from a story our universe never wrote. How do we weigh a miracle against the potential cost of a paradox? He heard the low hum of the armory, where a man with a cybernetic arm methodically cleaned a rifle, his thoughts a silent, guarded hum. He heard the whispers in the commissary, the agents over coffee. Saw him lift a freight train like it was balsa wood. Trojan horse, got to be. Remember the Sentry? That ended well. Think he's with the Skrulls? No, this is something new, something brighter. And he heard the name, spoken with a mix of fear and yearning, Savior. It was a word that sat heavily on his heart. For 2 days, they observed. They scanned, they probed, they debated. He accepted it all with a patience that seemed to unnerve them further. He ate the food they provided. It was bland, nutritionally efficient. He answered their basic, non-invasive questions through the intercom. He spent hours simply looking out the window at the sun, his face tranquil, absorbing its strength. Finally, the delegation arrived. Tony Stark led, wearing a cashmere sweater and an expression of curated nonchalance that his elevated heart rate and the slight tension in his jaw betrayed. Steve Rogers was at his shoulder, his posture straight, his eyes clear but cautious, the weight of command a visible mantle. Natasha Romanoff flanked them, a study in neutral observation, her every micro-expression locked down, and behind them, a presence that filled the doorway. Thor Odinson. He wore not his royal armor, but simpler Asgardian leathers. His eyes fixed on Superman with the piercing gaze of one who has measured the worth of kings and monsters. The containment field at the front of the module deactivated with a low hum, leaving only the transparent wall. So, Clark, Tony began, pacing a short, tight line. Nice save in Nairobi. Very flashy. Very efficient. Minimal collateral. Almost, he paused, turning sharply. Too minimal. In my experience, that's usually the preamble. So, what's the play? Superman met Stark's eyes, holding the challenge without aggression. There is no play, Mr. Stark. I saw people in danger. I helped. Just like that? Tony's eyebrows shot up. No internal debate? No risk assessment algorithm? No wondering if the guy in the third car maybe had an unpaid parking ticket? Just like that, Superman said, his voice calm and even. When a child cries for help, you don't first run a background check. Steve stepped forward, his hands clasped in front of him. Your actions are commendable, but our concern isn't just about immediate threats. Dr. Stephen Strange, our Sorcerer Supreme, believes your very presence here could, intentionally or not, damage the fabric of our reality. You're an outsider, a fundamental anomaly. Superman nodded slowly. He rose from the cot, a smooth, powerful motion that made the agents in the periphery tense. He moved to the glass, not to threaten, but to bridge the gap of isolation. I understand your concern, Captain. Truly, I do. Where I come from, I learned that power is a test, every day. I chose to be a symbol, not of authority, but of a reminder. A reminder that power doesn't have to corrupt. That strength can be used to lift people up, not hold them down. He placed a hand gently against the transparent surface. I don't know the mechanics of how I arrived here, but while I am here, that is all I want to do. To help. Thor's voice rumbled through the room, deep and resonant as distant thunder. You speak with the conviction of a monarch, of Odin himself in his wisdom. Yet you wear no crown. You wield power that would make Asgard's finest warriors envious, yet you claim no throne, demand no fealty. Why is this? Superman turned his steady gaze to the god of thunder. Because the people don't belong to me, Thor. I belong to them. It's a promise I made to myself and to them a long time ago. A promise first taught to me by a farmer and a seamstress in Kansas. Tony Stark barked a laugh, a short, brittle sound devoid of humor. A promise, right. See, that's the thing about promises from guys with world-breaking power. We've met them. We've fought them. They have good intentions, right up until the moment they decide that their vision is worth a mountain of bodies. We've made our messes here. We're trying to clean them up. That means rules, oversight, the Sokovia Accords. You don't just get to fly around being hope. Hope isn't a policy. A flicker of pain crossed Superman's face, there and gone. You regulate compassion? We regulate consequences. Tony shot back, his facade cracking to reveal the raw, haunted engineer beneath. We made a mess, and now we live in the cleanup every day. You walk in here with your perfect hair and your moral certainty, and you haven't had to make the call. The real one. The one that leaves you staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., playing it over and over again, wondering if trading a city for a planet was the right move. You haven't earned that certainty. The conversation spiraled from there, a tempest of clashing philosophies forged in different fires. Steve spoke of duty and the burden of command, of making hard choices from a place of principle. Natasha spoke of cost, the ledger of blood that every victory seems to write in invisible ink, the compromises that stain a soul. Bruce, who had remained silent, spoke through the intercom, his voice hesitant, about the terror of uncontrolled power, the monster that always lurks just beneath the skin. Superman listened to it all. He didn't interrupt. He absorbed their words, their pain, their trauma etched into every sentence. And they saw it in his eyes, a profound, unsettling empathy. He understood their anguish. He recognized the scars of their wars, but he did not accept their conclusion. When the storm of their rhetoric paused, his voice was quiet, yet it filled the room with its clarity. You believe your suffering is a necessary teacher, that to be a protector here means to be scarred, to be hardened, to accept that some must be lost so that others may live. I have suffered too. I have lost everything. For a moment, the endless blue of his eyes held a galaxy of loss. But I believe we suffer so we can learn how not to make others suffer. The hard choice shouldn't be which lives to sacrifice, but how to save them all. The silence that followed was thick. It was broken by a faint, desperate sound only Superman could hear. A building, weakened during the chaotic energy pulses of the Nairobi anomaly, had finally given way in a densely populated district of Jakarta. The cries were a distant symphony of terror. He straightened. A residential commercial complex has collapsed in Jakarta. Section C7 is unstable. There are 43 people trapped in the primary rubble pocket. Their oxygen is depleting. The Avengers stared. Friday's voice confirmed from the ceiling. Scanners are picking up a structural failure in Jakarta. Emergency signals are jammed. Local authorities are not yet aware of the full scope. We need to mobilize a team, Steve began, turning. Every second you debate, their chances fade, Superman said, not with accusation, but with devastating fact. Let me help. They hesitated. In their earpieces, Nick Fury's voice, icy and definitive, ordered a full tactical escort. He does not move without Stark and Rhodes on his wings and Romanoff on the ground. He is an asset, not an ally. Remember the difference. Superman simply looked at them. The quiet plea in his eyes was more compelling than any demand. Suit up, Steve said, the words tasting of both risk and reluctant hope. They let him go. He didn't blast through the roof. He waited for the bay doors to open, then shot into the sky, a blue and red streak against the clouds. Iron Man and War Machine fell in beside him, their repulsors whining at maximum to keep pace. Below, a stealth Quinjet carrying Natasha and a medical team followed. What they witnessed in Jakarta was not a military extraction. It was a ballet of impossible precision. Superman landed at the edge of the devastation, his boots touching down without a sound. For a moment, he simply looked, his vision shifting through spectrums. He saw the heat signatures of the living, pulsing like terrified stars in the dark crush of concrete and steel. He heard the frantic beat of hearts, the whimpers of children, the groans of the injured. Then he moved. He flowed through the rubble like it was water, his movements a blur even to Tony's enhanced tracking. He didn't bulldoze, he excavated. His fingers, capable of crushing adamantium, would slide between layers of collapsed flooring to tap a support beam back into alignment with infinitesimal pressure. He used his heat vision not as a weapon, but as a scalpel, slicing through rebar tangles with pinpoint accuracy, cauterizing severed lines to prevent fires. He pulled survivors free with a speed that defied physics, but it was his gentleness that dismantled the Avengers' assumptions. A woman, her leg pinned, wept in shock as he lifted a 5-ton slab off her with one hand, then cradled her in his other arm, flying her to the waiting medics with the care of a parent. He found a group of children in an air pocket, their teacher shielding them. He spoke to them in soft, calm Indonesian, a smile on his face as he carefully cleared a path, carrying them out 2 at a time. At one point, a secondary collapse threatened to bury a rescue team. Superman was there in a blink. He didn't pull them out. He simply stood back to the falling debris, letting a 12-ton girder shatter against his shoulders, holding the entire weight of the shifting ruin long enough for the team and the family they were digging for to scramble clear. Dust billowed around him. When it settled, he stood unmarked, his cape barely ruffled. Tony Stark hovered above, his weapons systems idle. Friday, analysis of his structural interventions. Minimal shockwave propagation. He's mitigating force dispersion at a quantum level, boss. It's like he's not just moving things, he's persuading physics. On the ground, Natasha watched as Superman, after clearing the last survivor, spent another 20 minutes using his microscopic vision and super speed to perform impromptu triage, stabilizing internal bleeding with precise heat application, setting compound fractures with gentle, unerring hands. He worked alongside the human doctors, following their lead, amplifying their efforts. The news footage, captured on 100 phones, went global in minutes. The world, so conditioned to heroes who fought monsters and left city blocks in ruins, saw a profoundly different image. A man who lifted rubble, not cities, who carried a soot-covered grandmother to safety with the same reverence he would afford a world leader, who smiled at a crying child and produced a slightly bent but salvaged teddy bear from 3 floors down. Public opinion fractured violently. Hashtags trended. #the hope and #the risk. Social media became a war zone of ideals. Survivors and their families spoke of an angel, a sun god of compassion. Political pundits and security chiefs saw an unvetted, unstoppable WMD with a disarming smile. Editorial cartoons depicted him as both a shining savior holding up the world and as a Trojan horse of unimaginable scale. The Sokovia Accords Committee demanded immediate classification and control. The United Nations scheduled an emergency session. Back at the Avengers compound, the atmosphere was one of simmering crisis. In a conference room, Superman stood before them once more, having returned without protest. He gently, firmly refused Tony Stark's new, heavily negotiated offer, an official, accountable Avengers-adjacent role with trackers, mission-by-mission authorization, and a UN observer. "I cannot let my ability to help be subject to a committee's vote, Mr. Stark," he said, not unkindly. "Not when a vote could mean the difference between life and death for people I can hear crying out right now. I respect your system, but I answer to a higher one." "Which is?" Natasha asked, her head tilted. "Conscience," he said. The argument was cut off by a shrieking, pulsating alarm. The holotable in the center of the room blazed to life. A cosmic signature, familiar and vile to the original Avengers, flared like a septic star on the edge of the solar system. "It's the Chitauri homing beacon," Bruce Banner said, his face pale as data streamed across his tablet. "From the New York invasion. We thought all the mothership subsystems were deactivated or destroyed. This one, it was dormant, drifting in the Kuiper Belt. Something's reactivated it." "What's it doing?" Steve asked, his body already coiled for action. "It's singing a song of gravity," Thor growled, his hand tightening around Mjolnir's handle. "A siren call to the rocks of the void." The tactical display populated. The beacon was pulling a nearby mineral-dense asteroid belt into a new, unnatural orbit, a kinetic cascade. The math unfolded on the screen with brutal red clarity. The largest fragments, 6 city killers, each over a kilometer in diameter, were on a direct course for Earth. The smaller debris, thousands of rocks ranging from house-sized to football field-sized, formed a deadly shotgun blast aimed at the planet. Options, Steve said, his voice flat. Tony manipulated the hologram. Thor, Spectrum, and I take the big 6. Full orbital strike, repulsor overload, godly lightning, photonic bombardment. We can vaporize them. But the smaller debris? There are too many, moving too fast, too spread out. Our point defenses can't get them all. Even with Sorcerer Supreme's support for portal deflection, the saturation is too high. Bruce ran the projections. The casualty estimates scrolled. Initial impacts in oceanic and uninhabited areas would cause tsunamis. Strikes on populated landmasses were statistically inevitable. The numbers climbed into the millions, then tens of millions. It's the calculus of a siege, Bruce whispered, horrified. We save the planet by accepting that it will be wounded, gravely. The room was silent, save for the hum of the hologram and the frantic beeping of the alert. Steve's face was granite, the weight of 1,000 such decisions etched into it. Tony's was a mask of resigned agony. This was the real call he'd spoken of, the nightmare math he lived with. Natasha's eyes were already assessing the geopolitical fallout, the chaos to manage after the storm. Thor's jaw was set. The fury of a king who must condemn a part of his realm to save the whole. They knew this dance. The music was tragedy, and the steps were sacrifice. Superman looked from the tactical display, a starfield of death marked with cold, predictive lines, to their faces. He saw the acceptance there, the grim readiness to bear the cost, to add another scar to the worlds and their own souls. It was a look that broke his heart. No, he said. The single word was not a shout. It was a statement of fact, solid and immovable as the core of a planet. It rang in the room, pulling every eye to him. It's not a choice, Clark, Steve said, the weight of command making his voice husky. It's strategy. It's the only move on the board. It's a choice, Superman repeated, his voice gaining a new, firm resonance. He was already walking toward the massive, reinforced launch bay doors. And I'm making a different one. What's your plan? Tony demanded, stepping into his path. What's the brilliant, compassionate, no-sacrifice play here? You gonna catch them all? There are thousands, moving at orbital velocities. Superman paused at the bay door control panel. He placed his hand on it. The security locks, powered by arc reactors and vibranium encryption, disengaged with a soft chime under his touch, a quiet demonstration of power he had never before shown. The doors began to part, revealing the twilight sky streaked with the first hints of the coming catastrophe, faint, fiery lines beginning to scar the atmosphere. He turned back to them, the wind of the open sky whipping his cape into a vibrant banner. His face was not angry nor arrogant. It was set with a determination so pure it was terrifying. My plan, he said, the words carrying over the rising wind, is to save everyone. Before anyone could react, before another argument could be formed, he shot forward, but not up into Earth's orbit to form a defensive line. He angled sharply, a blue and red streak becoming a lance of light aimed outward, away from Earth, leaving a momentary afterimage of hope against the darkening sky. He was flying not to intercept the debris, but to pierce through it, on a direct collision course with the source of the storm, the reactivated Chitauri beacon at the edge of the solar system. and the incoming torrent of rock and iron it commanded. The Avengers rushed to the bay edge, watching the streak diminish into the vault of space. Friday, track him! Tony yelled, his armor already closing around him. Trajectory confirmed. He is on a direct course for the beacon, ETA at his observed velocity, 8 minutes 37 seconds. The first wave of debris will enter terminal atmosphere in 12 minutes. He's going to try to destroy the beacon, stop the pull, Natasha said. And then what? Bruce asked, his voice small. Even if he does, the debris already in motion is still coming. The laws of physics don't care if the magnet gets turned off. Steve watched the last glint of red vanish into the starfield. In his heart, a war raged between the soldier's dread of a failed, idealistic plan and the man's desperate, kindling hope. He believes he can do the impossible. Tony's helmet retracted, his face etched with a complex dread. Yeah, and this universe, it has a real mean habit of punishing that belief. On the screens, the fiery lines of the first, smallest asteroids began to burn brighter in the upper atmosphere. The clock was ticking. The world below, unaware of the cosmic calculus just debated, looked up and saw the beginning of a shooting star storm. Some made wishes. The Avengers, hearts laden with the memory of fallen cities and lost friends, could only watch and wait and wonder if the man who refused to compromise had just committed the ultimate compromise, trading his own life for a symbol that would shatter against the hard rocks of reality. The silence in the launch bay was deafening, filled only with the howl of the wind and the silent scream of impending doom. The silence of space was not an absence of sound, but an overwhelming pressure of solitude. As Superman breached the thermosphere, shedding the thin blue skin of Earth's atmosphere, the friction ignited a brief, shimmering corona of plasma around his form, a momentary star born of velocity and purpose. Then he was through, plunging into the star-speckled infinite dark. The cold here was profound, a thermodynamic truth that even his invulnerable body registered as a crystalline clarity. It focused him. Ahead, his target pulsed against the void, the Chitauri beacon. It was a grotesque, biomechanical scar grafted onto the surface of a drifting, irregular planetoid. Its design was alien, all jagged spines and throbbing organic conduits that glowed with a sickly ultraviolet light. It functioned not as a simple transmitter, but as a gravitational distortion engine, its pulse waves rippling through the fabric of local spacetime. It had turned the surrounding asteroid belt into a weapon. Each pulse pulled hundreds of mountainous rock fragments, some the size of islands, others of cities, from their ancient, stable orbits, weaving them into a lethal, converging tapestry aimed at the heart of the blue-green world below. The Avengers' plan, relayed to him in terse, strategic shorthand, was tactically sound, born of a universe seasoned in triage. Identify the largest, most catastrophic projectiles. Shatter them with combined orbital strikes from the Iron Legion, Mjolnir, and strategic nuclear packages held in reserve. Let the resulting debris field, a catastrophic rain by any measure, hit the atmosphere. Mitigate, defend key population centers with shield projections and point defense lasers. Accept the inevitable losses. It was the brutal calculus of survival this Earth had learned, a grim subtraction of lives to preserve the greater sum. Superman's heart, a fusion engine of solar energy, rejected that arithmetic. His soul, forged in the heartland of a gentler world, could not solve for X, where X was an acceptable number of casualties. No one was acceptable. The very premise was a betrayal of the hope he carried. He shot forward, a blue and red streak against the cosmos. The asteroid belt resolved from a distant cloud into a chaotic, tumbling field of colossal debris. It was a slow-motion avalanche in a vacuum, a ballet of destruction where the dancers were continents of stone and iron. The thrum of the beacon vibrated through the very rock, a subsonic rhythm of pure annihilation he felt in his teeth. His first instinct, a flare of righteous anger, was to smash the beacon to subatomic particles with a single overwhelming blow. But he was not a being of instinct alone. His senses, dialed to a peak no human technology could fathom, painted a far more terrifying picture. The beacon wasn't just a device, it was a symbiote. Its energy matrix had woven itself into the planetoid's mantle, drawing on geothermal and latent cosmic radiation. Residual Chitauri energy signatures, unstable, quantum entangled, coursed through it like volatile nerves. A brute force destruction would be a decapitation that triggered systemic death, a chain reaction capable of vaporizing the entire asteroid belt and saturating the region with a wave of hard radiation that would scald the Earth's upper atmosphere for decades. The surgical strike was not an option, it was the only path. He took a breath he didn't need and flew into the storm. The chaos was immediate. Mountain-sized rocks, spinning with unpredictable momentum, caromed around him. A spinning shard of nickel iron, its edges sharp as cosmic razor blades, slammed into his back with the force of a tectonic shift. It shattered against his invulnerability, the fragments glinting darkly. He didn't flinch. His focus was absolute, funneled through his vision. His microscopic vision penetrated the beacon's hideous exterior, mapping its internal architecture with impossible detail. He saw the energy flows, rivers of lethal light, the neural network cores, the gravitational amplifiers. His heat vision, usually a weapon of immense destruction, became a scalpel. He adjusted its frequency and intensity until it was a beam fine enough to sever bonds at the molecular level with a precision measured in angstroms. He began from the inside out, like a surgeon operating on a bomb in a hurricane. Flying in a tight, intricate pattern around the pulsating mass, he targeted the secondary energy connections first. Each successful severance was met with a shudder through the structure and a slight change in the malignant pull on the asteroids. He worked with a speed that would blur to anyone watching, but to him, trapped in the relentless flow of microseconds, it felt agonizingly deliberate. Save everyone. Everyone. On Earth, in the Avengers' subterranean command center, the data streams told a colder, more clinical story. Bruce Banner, his fingers flying over a holographic interface, monitored the shifting energy signatures from a network of satellites. His brow was furrowed, not in anger, but in dawning, horrified comprehension. "He's not following the plan," Banner murmured, his voice tense. "He's not engaging the priority asteroids. He's performing microsurgery on the beacon itself. The energy readings are dropping in discrete, localized increments. It's an insane level of precision." A master tactical display dominated the room. A timer, stark and red, counted down to projected atmospheric entry of the leading edge of the asteroid swarm. A secondary screen displayed a live casualty projection model, its algorithms fed by trajectory data, population density maps, and estimated impact energies. As Superman worked on the beacon, the model recalibrated. The initial estimate, a horrific but manageable 250,000 based on the Avengers' plan of breaking the largest rocks had been erased. The numbers began to climb. 50,000, 200,000, 500,000. The model was now calculating the outcome of Superman's chosen path. A delayed but more widespread debris shower. Steve Rogers stood before the screen, his arms crossed, his jaw a hard line. The blue of his eyes was ice. He has to switch targets. He's buying the wrong time. He turned, his voice taking on the resonant tone of command. Tony, Thor, suit up. We move to orbital strike positions now. We execute the original protocol. Natasha Romanoff leaned against a console, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, however, were fixed on the climbing casualty estimate. He asked for our trust, she said, the words quiet but clear in the tense room. And down here, millions are begging for their lives, Steve countered, his compassion warring with his duty. Trust isn't a blanket that smothers strategic reality. The comm system crackled. Nick Fury's face, grim and etched with the weight of impossible decisions, appeared on a screen. He'd been monitoring from the reconstructed helicarrier high in the stratosphere. This is the predictable flaw of unilateral power coupled with an absolutist morality, Fury stated, his one eye boring into the camera. He's not making the hard choice. He's choosing the salve for his own conscience over the lives he's sworn to protect. The calculus changed the moment he delayed. Execute contingency Gamma. Avengers, you are authorized to engage the priority targets with or without him. In the arming bay, Tony Stark sealed his nanotech suit with a thought, the metal flowing over him. His face, visible for a moment in the helmet's HUD reflection, was pale. He wasn't looking at the casualty counter. He was looking at the astrophysical feed, watching the pinpoint of energy that was Superman, weaving its futile, beautiful dance. Come on, Big Blue, Tony whispered, a desperate plea to the void. See the numbers, see them. In space, Superman felt a major primary conduit snap. A cascade of failing systems rippled through the beacon. A significant portion of the asteroid field, roughly 30%, broke free from the artificial gravitational pull, their trajectories shifting from convergent to divergent, drifting harmlessly into the outer belt. Progress. But the timer was a drumbeat in his mind, synced with the data stream from the Avengers. He could see it, overlaying his perception of the beacon's anatomy. He saw the Earth, a fragile, achingly beautiful marble of blue and white, hanging in the black. He saw the scarlet trajectories of the remaining rocks, like accusing fingers pointing at cities, at towns, at villages. A crossroads crystallized in a fraction of a second. He could stop now. Abandon the delicate internal dismantling, turn his heat vision to its fullest power, and sweep it across the remaining threatening asteroids, shattering them into smaller, more burnable pieces. The death toll would be significant, but lower than the projection now flashing on the screens below. It would be the victory this universe understood. A victory written in gravestones, but a victory nonetheless. A memory flashed, unbidden. Jonathan Kent's hand on his shoulder. The Kansas sun setting behind them. The power you have, Clark. It means you get to decide what's right, not what's easy. You use it to help people. All people. Another, Lois, her fierce eyes soft for a moment in the quiet of their apartment. The world needs a savior, Clark. But more than that, it needs a man who believes it can be better, who makes us believe it. The belief that no one had to be collateral damage. The belief that there was always a way to save everyone. It was the core of him, the foundational rock of Superman. He turned his back on the tempting, tragic calculus. He stayed at the beacon. His hands, steady as titanium pillars in the zero-G, continued their work. The heat beam flickered, cutting, slicing, unmaking the weapon with a care that bordered on reverence. The final connection was the heart of the weapon, a neural network core, a cancerous knot of bioorganic technology fused directly into the planetoid's molten mantle. It was a bomb within a bomb. One imprecise cut, one surge of energy, and it would trigger the cataclysm he was trying to prevent. Superman hovered before it. For the first time, a bead of metaphorical sweat might have formed in the void. He used his freeze breath, a careful, directed stream that crystallized the surrounding rock into a brittle, supercooled shell, insulating the core. Then, with fingers capable of crushing diamonds, yet sensitive enough to feel the vibration of a butterfly's wings, he began to peel back the layers. It was a dissection of death itself. On Earth, the first pieces arrived. They were the vanguard of the debris field. The fragments too small for Superman to have individually targeted, too numerous and widespread for the Avengers' now activated orbital defenses to fully intercept. They hit the upper atmosphere, transforming from silent, dark stones into screaming meteors. They became a shower of shooting stars, beautiful, ephemeral, and deadly. They streaked across the dawn sky over Eastern Europe. They flared over the empty vastness of the South Pacific. They glittered ominously over the densely populated coast of Southeast Asia. Many blessedly burned up in the fiery embrace of re-entry, disintegrating into harmless dust. Some did not. A fragment the size of a delivery van, a jagged piece of carbonaceous chondrite, survived the plunge. Its path took it over the war-torn, struggling nation of Sokovia. It screamed over the capital city of Novigrad, a city still bearing the scars, both physical and psychic, of the Ultron crisis. Reconstruction had been slow, a testament to human resilience. New foundations had been laid atop the old wounds. The meteor fragment did not strike the city center. It impacted a wooded hillside 3 miles to the north. The impact was not nuclear, but it was cataclysmic. The kinetic energy released was equivalent to a large tactical warhead. The resulting fireball incinerated the surrounding forest and sent a supersonic shockwave radiating outward. Novigrad, nestled in the valley below, was not flattened. It was scoured. Every window exploded inward. Weaker structures, the temporary housing and partially rebuilt buildings, collapsed. Fires erupted simultaneously across the city as gas lines ruptured. The hill itself partially liquefied, triggering a mudslide that buried the northern districts. The town that had been painstakingly rebuilding from one superhuman-caused tragedy was erased in a fireball of cosmic, cruel irony. In the Avengers Command Center, the casualty ticker, which had been climbing steadily, suddenly spiked. The numbers scrolled, accelerated by the AI's ingestion of seismic data, thermal blooms and emergency transponders going silent. The final number, when the last rock fell and the skies finally cleared, and when, in the profound silence of space, the Chitauri beacon flickered one last time and died under Superman's careful, meticulous hands, settled on a figure. 1.4 million. He had saved the planet from an extinction-level event. He had saved billions. He had performed a feat of precision and power that defied all known physics. He had proven that the impossible solution was technically possible. He returned to Earth. He descended not in a triumphant streak, but in a slow, heavy arc, like a falling star drained of its light. He landed on the damaged tarmac outside the Avengers facility, the ground cracking under his weight, not from force, but from the profound gravity of his failure. He was smeared with alien dust and the carbon scoring of micrometeorites. His cape was torn in several places. He walked into the command center. The silence was a physical thing, thick and choking. The main screens no longer showed trajectories or timers. They showed news feeds, the smoldering ruins of Novigrad from a dozen angles, frantic rescue workers moving through apocalyptic landscapes. A weeping woman clutching a child's toy, her face a mask of utter desolation. He saw the Avengers. They were not suited for battle anymore. They stood in their street clothes, looking older, wearier than he had ever seen them. He met their eyes one by one. He saw it, not the hot blaze of anger he might have expected, not the outrage. Something worse, a cold, grim confirmation, a terrible validation of their worldview. See, their silence said, this is the way it is. This is the price we warned you about. Tony Stark spoke first. He was leaning against a console, arms hanging loosely at his sides. His voice was hollow, stripped of all its usual sarcasm and energy. It was the voice of a man reading an epitaph. The beacon? Destroyed, Superman said, his own voice softer than he intended. Safely. Its energy matrix is completely inert. It won't threaten anyone, ever again. The asteroids? Steve Rogers asked, his gaze steady and unbearable. Diverted or pulverized in the upper atmosphere. The major, continent-killing impacts, they were prevented. Tony nodded slowly, a mechanical bob of his head. 1.4 million people, Clark. He said the name, not the title. It was an accusation of intimacy. In exchange for $7 billion. That's a good trade, a fantastic trade by the brutal metrics of survival. That's the trade we were prepared to make, the only trade on the menu. He finally looked up and his eyes were haunted. You took a detour on your way to making it. You took longer to get to the same damn place. The words hit Superman with the force of a phantom blow. He physically recoiled, a slight, almost imperceptible stagger. I was trying to save everyone. You tried, Captain America said. His voice was heavy with a grief he knew all too well, a grief from a century of loss. And because you tried to do the impossible, because you refused to accept the possible, people died who didn't have to. People in Sokovia, they've already paid a price for heroes fighting their battles. Now they've paid yours. He stepped closer, not in threat, but in solemn, awful judgment. Your mercy, Clark, your belief that no one has to fall, it had a cost, a tangible, bloody cost. It always does here. The words landed not just on Superman, but on the very ideal he represented. They carried the weight of this universe's unyielding physics, its history written in sacrifice and blood. Superman looked down at his own hands, hands that could cradle a newborn or push a planet from its course. Hands that had just performed miracles of microengineering in the harshest environment imaginable. They were clean. There was no blood on them. And yet, they felt drenched. His ideal, the unwavering belief that no one had to be a cost of doing business, that hope was a proactive force, not a consolation prize, had crashed against the unforgiving granite of this reality. It had shattered. He had believed, truly believed, that with enough power, enough will, enough goodness, the universe would bend. Here, the universe demanded a blood sacrifice as a down payment on survival. He began, the word escaping like air from a punctured lung. He sought the others, the sure, confident words that had always been there, born of truth and justice. They failed him. They crumbled to ash on his tongue. For the first time since the rockets of Krypton carried him to Earth, the unshakable belief in the better way wavered. Not just wavered, it cracked, revealing a terrifying darkness of doubt beneath. The weight he carried, the extinct civilization of Krypton, the hopes of his first Earth, was now joined by a new, more terrible burden: the weight of 1.4 million souls. Souls he had not killed, but whom he had, through his hesitation, his principled stand, his mercy, nonetheless condemned. Their faces joined the ghosts in his memory. Without another word, he turned. The heroes, united in their grim understanding, let him go. There was no condemnation, no shouted recrimination. There was nothing more to say. The evidence was burning on a dozen screens. He walked out into the gray, sickly light of a dawn that felt like it was filtered through ash. The sun was rising, but it brought no warmth, no renewal. Alone on a barren cliffside overlooking the wounded world, Superman stared at the sun of this unfamiliar universe. Its golden rays fed his cells, replenished his power, but they did not comfort him. They were merely fuel. He tuned his hearing, not to seek cries for help this time, but to hear the consequence. He heard it all, the wails of the grieving in 100 languages, a symphony of anguish. The frantic, crackling communications of emergency responders buried in rubble. The cold, analytical tones of news anchors and military strategists dissecting his failure, debating the Superman question with chilling detachment. The rising voices of politicians in hidden chambers already calling for his registration, his containment, his exile from a planet he had just saved. And beneath it all, louder than the cacophony of a wounded world, a quieter, more terrifying sound. The voice in his own heart. The voice that had always been his guide, his moral compass, now whispering a treacherous, doubt-riddled counterpoint. What if they are right? The question echoed in the vast, hollow chamber of his soul. It was the sound of a fundamental truth breaking. The man of tomorrow stood in the harsh light of today, and for the first time he feared what tomorrow might bring. The world did not turn against Superman, not entirely. Such absolute verdicts are for simpler stories, cleaner conflicts. Instead, humanity and its pantheon of defenders fractured along 1,000 fault lines of fear, gratitude, and philosophical dread. The image of the Kryptonian hovering over the ruined hellscape of Sokovia, holding a dead child, had seared itself into the global psyche. It was not an image of triumph, but of catastrophic moral failure, and its ambiguity was a poison that worked slowly, paralyzing the very idea of a hero. To a significant portion of the world, he became the reluctant executioner. He was the tragic figure who had stared into the abyss of a genocidal equation and, at the last possible second, had refused to blink. Memes and murals depicted him with a tear of molten steel cutting through the grime on his cheek, holding the small body aloft like a blasphemous offering. He was a monument to the principle that some lines must never be crossed, even if the universe itself seems to demand it. He chose us, not an outcome, became a mantra for this faction. They saw in his refusal not weakness, but a terrifying, almost insane strength. the strength to accept the weight of millions of deaths to keep his soul, and by extension, the soul of heroism, clean. For them, Superman became a saint of the impossible choice, a lightning rod for their own anxieties about a world increasingly governed by algorithmic coldness and utilitarian logic. To the other, more vocal, more politically potent faction, he was the arrogant god. Pundits, security advisors, and survivors from the evacuated cities, their terror now curdled into a bitter, survivalist guilt, branded him the ultimate hypocrite. He had the power to make the hard call, to be the surgeon who amputates a limb to save the body, and he had chosen poetic self-regard over practical salvation. He valued his own moral comfort over our lives, was their damning refrain. Editorial cartoons depicted him polishing a pristine, untarnished symbol on his chest, while cities burned in the reflection. He was, to them, a celestial child playing with toys called morals, while the real adults understood that governance and protection was often a filthy, bloody business of triage and compromise. He was a symbol, yes, but now a symbol of a dangerous, outdated idealism, a belief that one could stay pure in an impure world. The Avengers War Room became a sonic battleground for this schism. Tony Stark, his face etched with a new permanent hollow, was a ghost haunted by a second Sokovia. We built protocols after the first time. We created the Accords to prevent exactly this, the unchecked individual making a world-altering call. And what happened? A higher power ignored the call entirely. He would pace, a staccato rhythm of anxiety. He's a strategic liability of astronomical proportions. He operates on a codex written for a planet that doesn't exist anymore. We need a framework, a fail-safe, an understanding that if you wear the flag, you follow the chain of command when the apocalypse clock hits zero. Steve Rogers, older, wearier, carrying the ghost of a different failed utopia and the weight of a helicarrier's worth of bad calls, stood as a granite counterpoint. Tony, we've all made choices with blood on the ledger. I've led men to their deaths believing it was for the greater good. I've torn the world apart because I believed a principle was more important than peace. Who are we to condemn him for holding the line we all claim to fight for? Compassion isn't a protocol. It can't be written into a subclause. He needs our understanding, not our handcuffs. Natasha Romanoff, the spy who lived in the gray, tried to bridge the unbridgeable. It's not about condemning or absolving, it's about learning. Our world has gods now. How do we live with them? Do we make them our kings, our weapons, or our scapegoats? He's all three right now, and it's tearing us apart. The debate raged in circles, a perfect Ouroboros of accusation and defense, achieving nothing but a deeper, more institutionalized divide. Superman was aware of it all, the urgent, encrypted signals buzzing between the Avengers compound, the UN, and Wakanda. The screaming headlines, the quiet prayers in churches now directed as much to him as to any traditional deity. He heard it all, a relentless cacophony of judgment. He did not hide. He helped. But the act of heroism was now a sacrament performed in a shadow. The easy, sunlit confidence that had once defined him, the smile that promised, "I will catch you," was gone. In its place was a profound, contemplative stillness. He moved through disasters with a new, unsettling economy. He lifted fallen bridges in Chile not with steady, confident strength, but with a speed that screamed of a desperate need to be gone, to be anywhere but the site of potential failure. He extinguished a wildfire in Tasmania in a single gale force breath. then hovered for a moment, scanning the embers not for survivors, but as if expecting to see the accusing faces of Sokovia's dead in the smoke. He halted a tsunami near Japan by flash freezing a mountain of water, the resulting iceberg a stark, cold monument to his power and his isolation. He was trying to outrun the ghost of his failure, to drown its whispers in a torrent of good deeds. But the ghost sat on his shoulder, a constant, silent passenger. He sought understanding, not absolution, but a map to a country he did not know how to inhabit, a universe where his deepest truth might be a fatal flaw. He found the god of thunder on the storm-lashed cliffs of New Asgard in Norway. The fishing village was postcard quaint, but the air thrummed with the melancholy of a lost glory. Thor stood at the edge of the world, staring into the gray, churning expanse of the North Sea. A bottle of some Asgardian ale was in his hand, but his gaze was fixed on a horizon that no longer held the spires of his home. The weight he carried was not just in his broad shoulders, it was in his single blue eye, a depth that held the memories of a fallen people, a murdered brother, and a shattered hammer. "You carry your failures like I carried Mjolnir," Thor said, not turning. His voice was a low rumble, blending with the distant thunder. A worthy burden, but a burden still. It changes your center of gravity. You're always leaning into the wind, trying not to topple. Superman landed softly on the wet grass, the alien material of his suit stark against the Norse greenery. "I was told you are worthy, that the power of Mjolnir came to you because you were worthy. My power. It just is. A fact of my biology, like breathing. It asks nothing of me but to exist. My choices are my own." Thor took a long, deliberate drink. The wind whipped his hair and beard. "A weapon that chooses is a rare and beautiful thing. It is a conversation, a test, every time you grasp it. But worthiness..." He finally turned, his eye locking onto Superman's with an intensity that felt ancient. "Worthiness is not about the weapon. It is about the cost. My father, Odin, sent me to Midgard, stripped of my power to learn humility. I thought it a cruel joke. I learned it through loss, through my mother, slain before me, through my father, turning to dust in my arms, through my brother, dying for a people he pretended to hate, through my friends, my warriors, my people. Asgard is not a place, it is a people, and most of my people are dead." He took a step closer, the smell of ozone and sea salt clinging to him. Each loss, each failure sheared away a piece of my pride, my arrogance, my certainty. What is left after the storm has scoured the mountain clean. That bedrock, scarred and unyielding, that is what is worthy. He gestured with the bottle towards Superman. "Your restraint, son of El, is a form of pride, a towering, magnificent pride. You believe your way is so fundamentally right that you would let galaxies burn to prove its purity. You think your no is stronger than the universe's yes. True worthiness is not in refusing to let the hammer fall. It is in knowing, with a heart shattered and reassembled 1,000 times, when to let it fall. And then having the courage to bear the echo of its crash for all eternity." Superman watched the waves hurl themselves against the cliffs, breaking into nothingness. And if the hammer's fall costs the innocent, if the blow you strike to save a kingdom cracks the foundation and buries a village, a grim, weary smile touched Thor's lips. "Then you carry that too. You add their names to the list you recite in the quiet dark." "As I carry the literal ashes of Asgard in a satchel on my ship." They are not baggage. They are ballast. They keep you grounded in the truth that ruling, protecting, it is not about glory. It is about grief management. There was no condemnation in Thor's voice, only the grim, unvarnished wisdom of a survivor king. Superman left the cliffs feeling heavier, not lighter. The burden had not been lifted, it had been given a name, and the name was history. He found the Sorcerer Supreme in the Hong Kong Sanctum, a pocket of impossible geometry in the heart of the bustling city. Stephen Strange was performing a complex, silent ritual, his hands weaving strands of shimmering crimson light into a tear in the very air. The tear hissed with alien colors, a minor dimensional bleed from a place where geometry was a form of madness. "You're patching the cracks," Superman observed, his voice echoing softly in the vaulted chamber. "Constantly," Strange replied, his focus unwavering, his hands a blur of precise, graceful motion. "Reality is less a sturdy edifice and more a fragile eggshell, perpetually under siege. Things are always trying to get in, hungry things, mad things, or occasionally pieces of our own world, through trauma or ignorance, fall through." With a final, elegant twist, he sealed the breach. The crimson light dissolved, leaving only the smell of ozone and old books. Strange turned, the cloak of levitation adjusting itself at his shoulders. "You're a conundrum, Kal-El. A fascinating one. You don't break the rules of this reality. You are a walking, flying rule from another book entirely, inserted into our text. Your presence here is a constant, low-grade paradox. Your solar-powered biology, your tactile telekinesis, your very molecular structure. It hums at a frequency that doesn't quite harmonize with our local laws of physics. It's not destructive, yet, but it stresses the system like a singularity wearing a friendly face. Your system," Superman said, the memory of the bargain over Sokovia sharp in his mind, "seems to demand sacrifice. It is built on an economy of pain." Strange's expression was that of a surgeon explaining a terminal diagnosis. "It's not a demand. That implies a conscious arbiter. It's a law as fundamental as gravity or entropy. For every action, an equal and opposite reaction. For every great working of magic, a price. For every world saved, a cost must be extracted. The Ancient One drew power from the dark dimension to protect this world for centuries, knowing full well the corruption it invited into her own soul. I bargained with Dormammu, lord of that same dark dimension. In an endless, shattered time loop, I died, was unmade, driven insane, and reset thousands upon thousands of times to save this reality. Tony Stark wielded the concentrated power of the cosmos in his gauntlet, knowing it would kill him. He chose the cost. Strange stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. We don't seek the cost. We accept it. We choose it because the alternative is worse. Your refusal to consciously choose a cost, it doesn't make you noble. From where I stand, in the trenches of the multiversal war, it can make you look like a tourist in a war zone, horrified that the soldiers have mud on their boots and blood on their hands. You want to win the war without ever firing a shot or losing a man. That is not strategy. That is a fantasy. The words were not shouted. They were delivered with the cold, clean precision of a scalpel, and they cut deeper than any kryptonite. Superman felt the core question of his existence, the mantra of both his fathers, "You can save everyone," laid bare on the sanctum's floor, exposed as a potentially beautiful, deadly lie. Is there no other way? The question left him. smaller than he intended. For a fleeting moment, the sternness in Strange's eyes softened, replaced by something akin to pity. Hope is a weapon, Kal-El, perhaps the most powerful one in any universe. It can break chains, topple empires, and rewrite destinies. But even a surgeon's blade, the sharpest and most precise instrument of salvation, must draw blood to heal. The question isn't whether you will get blood on your hands. The question is, what and who are you willing to bleed? The lesson was hammered home not in words, but in brutal living witness. A minor demonic incursion, a rupture from a sulfurous pocket dimension, erupted in the financial district of London. Reality bled a weeping, pus-yellow ichor, and serpentine horrors of chitin and shadow poured forth, spreading panic. Superman was there in a heartbeat, a blue and red streak against the gothic gloom. He fought alongside the masters of the mystic arts, their mandalas of light slicing through demon flesh, and the frantic, quipping agility of Spider-Man, who was trying to evacuate civilians while web-slinging between monstrosities. "Heads up, big guy. This one's got bad breath and worse manners," Spider-Man called, flipping over a claw swipe. Superman heat-visioned the creature, but the battle was chaotic. The demons were not just physical, they were metaphysical infections, and for everyone he pummeled into paste, the sorcerers had to seal the minor rift it emerged from. It was a war on two fronts, and Superman was only equipped for one. At the climax, the central rift, a throbbing wound in the fabric of the city, destabilized. A sorcerer's containment spell had been broken by a titanic, bull-headed abomination Superman had just hurled into the Thames. The rift pulsed, a sickly green heart, and began to expand. A gravitational whirlpool formed, sucking cars, rubble, and shattered glass toward it. Strange, his teeth gritted, his hands straining to hold 100 shimmering strands of containment magic, shouted a diagnosis that was also a death sentence. "It's going critical. If it collapses in on itself, the backblast will unmake everything in a 3-block radius. The only way to seal it is from the other side, to cast the binding seal from within the discontinuity." It was a death sentence. Everyone knew it. The magical energy on this side was too chaotic. A stable seal needed to be woven from the epicenter of the instability, a place where physics and magic dissolved into screaming nonsense. A place no human body or mind could survive for more than a second. A young man, a sorcerer barely out of his apprenticeship, stepped forward. He couldn't have been more than 20. His robes were singed, his face smudged with soot and blood. He looked at Strange, his teacher, and in that look was no plea, no fear for himself, only a request for confirmation. Strange, his face a mask of agonized resignation, gave the faintest, most terrible of nods. The young man turned toward the screaming, devouring portal. "No." The word was not a shout, but a command that shook the very air. Superman moved, a blur of primary color, placing himself between the apprentice and the maelstrom. "There has to be another way. Let me go. My cells are charged by a yellow sun. I can withstand energies that would vaporize you. I can survive it." Strange didn't look away from the straining spell. "Your molecular structure, your bio-aura, it's an alien constant in a magical equation. You would be a wrench in the gears. Your presence on the other side would destabilize the binding spell before it could form. It has to be him. His magic is of this world. It can harmonize with the spell. There is no other way." The finality was absolute. The young sorcerer, His name was Leo, Superman would later learn, approached. He didn't look at the horror before him. He looked at Superman and placed a trembling but steady hand on the iconic S shield. It's okay, Leo said, his voice trembling but clear, fighting to be heard over the demonic roar and the sucking wind. This is my duty. This is the job. He offered a small, heartbreaking smile. You save the world your way. Let me save it mine. And before Superman's super speed could react, before his mind could formulate another argument, another impossible solution, Leo darted around him, took a running start, and leapt into the heart of the screaming green oblivion. For a second, nothing. Then a brilliant, pure white light erupted from within the rift, a star being born in a place of absolute dark. The light traced a complex, beautiful mandala, a seal of breathtaking intricacy. The rift shuddered, the greedy suction ceased, and with a sound like a universe sighing, it snapped shut. Silence. It was deafening. The cost, so neatly tallied, one life for thousands. One willing, terrified, courageous young man traded for the safety of a city block. Superman stood amidst the smoldering rubble, the smell of ozone, sulfur, and something purer, sacrificial magic, hanging into the air. He looked down at his own hands, hands that could shatter mountains, hold up continents, freeze oceans. Hands that had just been held at bay by a gentle, human touch. They had been powerless, utterly, completely powerless to stop a single chosen death. He had been rendered a spectator at the moment of truest heroism. In that crushing silence, the philosophical confrontation crystallized into a cold, hard, personal truth. It wormed its way past his ideals and nestled in his Kryptonian heart, a shard of ice. To operate in this world, to truly protect it alongside its native defenders, he might have to violate his deepest, most sacred belief. The belief instilled by Jonathan Kent, affirmed by Jor-El, written in the very light of his Earth sun. The belief that no one is expendable, that there is always another way. That belief he saw now on the ravaged streets of London might itself be a luxury. A beautiful, profound luxury that this harder, older, more scarred universe could not always afford. That night, he hovered in the silent vacuum between Earth and the moon. Below him, the blue marble turned, bathed in the silver glow. He listened. He heard the billion heartbeats, the steady rhythm of sleep, the frantic pace of an emergency room, the joyful syncopation of a dance club, the lonely, slow thump of an insomniac. He heard the symphony of pain and joy, of creation and destruction, of love and loss. It was a song he had pledged his life to protect. But now he heard the dissonant notes within it, the notes written in the key of sacrifice, the whispered goodbyes of soldiers, the last thoughts of firefighters, the silent acceptance of doctors facing a no-win triage. This world, for all its beauty, ran on a fuel of conscious, painful choice. The hope that defined him, the hope that was his North Star, his power source, his reason for being, flickered, not extinguished, never that, but tested in a forge of grim, unyielding necessity. It was no longer a simple, radiant sun. It was a flame in a hurricane, bending, straining, threatening to be torn apart. He was an idealist from a dead world, trying to graft his paradise onto a garden that had grown in thorns and blood. He was a citizen of a universe of moral realists, of gods and sorcerers and soldiers who had long ago reconciled themselves to the arithmetic of salvation. And the universe, with its immutable laws and its cruel equations, was winning. It was then that the new alert pulsed, not through conventional channels, but across a spectrum of perception only beings of a certain power could sense. It vibrated in the quantum realm, whispered in the dark dimension, echoed in the Odin force. The Avengers detected it as a spike in cosmic background radiation. Stephen Strange felt it as a migraine in the collective consciousness of the Faltine. Thor heard it as a wrong note in the music of the spheres. It was not an asteroid, not a demonic horde. It was something older, colder, and far more abstract. The cosmic iconoclast. An entity born in the silent eons before the first stars, a conceptual predator. It did not feed on worlds or life force, but on belief systems, on symbols, on narratives of meaning. It devoured faiths, crumbled ideologies, and shattered paradigms. It was the void that followed a broken promise, the nihilism after a fallen idol. Its presence was a psychic frost, an absolute zero of meaning. And it had detected a profound, intoxicating new source of nourishment in this sector of reality, a beacon of pure, undiluted, solar-powered hope. A symbol so bright, so potent, that its shattering would be a feast that could sustain the iconoclast for millennia. It had felt the tremors of Superman's crisis, his agonizing dilemma over Sokovia, his philosophical torment. It smelled the blood in the water of his ideals. It was coming, and its strategy was elegantly, horrifyingly simple. It would not fight Superman with claws or energy blasts. It would force a choice. A choice so terrible, so morally annihilating, so perfectly designed to exploit the fault line now cracking his soul, that the very concept of hope would be proven a pathetic illusion in the choosing. It would make him the agent of his own symbolic destruction. It would force Kal-El to look into the abyss, not as a spectator, but as an executioner. And in that moment, the hope he projected to the world would die, and the iconoclast would swallow the resulting darkness whole. High above Earth, Superman felt its approach. It was a chill in his soul, a psychic frost creeping toward the warmth of his sun. He understood its nature instantly, intuitively, as only another symbol could. He knew with a certainty that froze the very solar fire in his veins what it would demand of him. It would not ask him to refuse a choice. It would force him to make one, to choose who lived and who died, not by chance or by the wickedness of others, but by his own deliberate, conscious, unhurried hand. It would make him the calculator, the utilitarian god he had refused to become. The tourist was gone. The visitor from a kinder world had been shown the true lay of the land in London's ashes and on Norway's cliffs. Now, he was a soldier, and the trench, he could see it stretching before him into a nightmare future, was filling with blood. His blood, the blood of his ideals, and the blood of those he might soon be commanded to sacrifice. He turned his face from the peaceful moon back toward the waiting earth. The sun would rise soon. But for the first time, Clark Kent, Kal-El, Superman, wondered if he would still recognize the man who flew to meet its light. The end did not arrive with a bang or even a whimper. It arrived with silence. It manifested as a perfect, seamless sphere the size of a small moon, drifting into a geostationary orbit over the Pacific. It was not black, for black is a color, an absorption of light. It was void gray, a shade that existed as the negation of pigment, of frequency, of concept. It was the cosmic iconoclast. It did not invade, it subtracted. Its influence propagated not as a wave of destruction, but as a chilling deficit, a leaching away of essence. First to go were the superfluous wavelengths. Flowers in the Keukenhof Gardens in the Netherlands didn't wilt. Their vibrant reds, yellows, and purples simply drained away, leaving behind botanical sketches in shades of gray. Birdsong in the Amazon became muffled, then tinny, then ceased, not because the birds stopped singing, but because the meaning of song, its joy, its warning, its courtship, was stripped from the air, leaving only empty vibrations. Then the more complex abstractions began to fade. The triumphant swell of a symphony felt flat. The heart-clenching grief at a funeral felt distant, academic. The warm, wordless bond between a parent and a child grew thin and cold. The iconoclast was not an aggressor in the conventional sense. It was a condition, a metaphysical parasite feeding on the very substrate of reality, meaning, narrative, the stories, big and small, that collectively defined existence. It turned the universe into a bland, gray textbook of itself, devoid of poetry. The world's greatest defenders assembled in orbit, a constellation of power and intellect facing the anti-presence. The assault was magnificent and utterly futile. Iron Man's repulsor beams, capable of punching through battleship armor, streamed into the sphere's surface and simply vanished, their energy narratives of thrust and heat unconsummated. Thor summoned a storm that would have razed continents, hurling Mjolnir with a cry that shook the stars. The lightning, a tale of divine wrath and cosmic power, struck the gray surface and was absorbed without a flicker, its story deemed irrelevant. Doctor Strange wove shields of eldritch symbolism and attacks of unraveling logic. His spells, complex narratives of magic, dissolved into incoherent sparks before they could even touch the entity, their premises invalidated. The iconoclast did not fight back. It just was. And then it spoke, not with sound, but by inserting its ultimatum directly into the conscious and subconscious minds of every sentient being on Earth. The message was chillingly simple, a syllogism of despair. A sacrifice is required, an offering of hope willingly made in the currency of despair. The entity known as Superman must select 1 billion human lives. He must designate them by name, by city, by any metric, and consciously, deliberately consent to their erasure. He must internalize the cruel math, perform the moral subtraction with his own will. If he does this, the iconoclast will depart, its hunger for a tragic narrative sated. If he refuses, it will continue its consumption until the conceptual framework of this reality is gone. Not just life, but the very ideas of life, death, love, and hate will be negated. Existence will become static, neutral, nothing. 1 billion lives for the remaining 7. The calculus of utilitarianism screamed its grim answer. In the spreading emotional numbness, even those who might be chosen felt a hollow, logical echo. It is the greater good. Make the choice. End the uncertainty. The Avengers were rendered inert. Captain America stood on the deck of a S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, his fists clenched, his moral compass spinning wildly. There was no enemy to stand against, no line to hold. This was a referendum not on strength, but on the soul. Tony Stark, locked in his suit, ran simulation after simulation, searching for a technological loophole, a frequency to block, a shield to generate. Every solution presupposed a reality that obeyed consistent rules. The iconoclast was eating the rules. Bruce Banner trembled. The Hulk a useless roar of frustration in his mind, for what was rage without consequence, without a story of cause and effect? Natasha Romanoff and Clint Barton, masters of pragmatic sacrifice, looked at each other and saw only a void where their hard-won calculus of necessary evil now meant nothing. In the silent theater of orbit, Superman faced the sphere. He felt the weight of the ultimatum, a cosmic anvil on his shoulders. He felt the despair rising from Earth, not as a scream, but as a sigh, a terrible, resigned acceptance. He saw the data streams on his Justice League comms, population metrics flashing, the cold numbers begging to be crunched. He saw Tony's face, gaunt and desperate on a private channel, the genius finally out of ideas. He saw Steve Rogers' visage, the man who would literally die before sacrificing an innocent, looking utterly broken. The very principle of his being invalidated. The iconoclast prodded him, not with force, but with possibility. It flooded his mind with a cascade of data made intimate. A billion faces flashing before his eyes, a laughing child in Seoul, an old man tending a garden in Naples, a student reading in a Cairo library, a family gathered around a table in Buenos Aires. A billion heartbeats, a billion stories, rich with potential, love, and regret. Choose, the entity whispered, its voice the sound of static between stars. Be the hero this world needs. Be pragmatic. Be strong. Carry this burden so they don't have to. Pay the price. Superman closed his eyes. The noise of the cosmos, the psychic pressure, the terrified prayers of billions. He let it all recede. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he sought a different voice. He thought of Jonathan Kent, sitting with him on a fence post at the edge of the Smallville field, the smell of turned earth in the air. You have to decide what kind of man you want to grow up to be, Clark. Because whoever that man is, good man or bad, he's going to change the world. He thought of Martha, her hands guiding his, teaching him to sew a ripped shirt, her lesson about strength being in mending, not just preventing tears. He thought of the apprentice sorcerer from Asgard, stepping willingly, nobly into the path of his master's destructive magic, a sacrifice born of love and duty. This was not that. This was not taking a blow meant for another. This was the work of an executioner, a calculator of acceptable losses. It was the antithesis of every lesson, every value, every story that made him Clark Kent of Kansas. He opened his eyes. The familiar, warm blue had not dimmed. Instead, it had hardened into something adamantine, a resolve forged in a heart that had chosen its nature long ago. No, he said. A single word, not shouted in defiance, but stated with the quiet, absolute finality of a bedrock truth. He broadcast it on every frequency, psychic and electromagnetic, back to the entity and to the waiting, terrified earth below. Then all will be unmade, the iconoclast replied, its satisfaction a cold spot in the universe. Your stubbornness is just another narrative, a tragic one. The fall of the incorruptible hero. We will consume it too. You feed on stories, Superman said, flying closer to the gray sphere. The null field around it was a psychic vacuum, trying to drain the very concept of Superman from him. The hope he represented, the myth, the symbol. It felt like flying into the memory of Krypton's death, a loss of everything that gave things name and purpose. You think hope is just another plot point, a setup for a fall. You're wrong. He did not attack. He turned his back on the entity, an act of breathtaking defiance. He dove toward Earth, not to the gathering of heroes, but to the heart of the numbness. He aimed for the crowded, bustling streets of Delhi, where the gray pall was thick and the eyes of millions were turning hollow. He landed in a marketplace, the air deadened of scent and sound. Stalls of spices were now mounds of gray dust. Silks were dirty linens. People moved like automatons, their interactions transactional and empty. He did not strike a pose. He did not give a stirring speech to the masses. He walked to a stall where an old woman sat, staring at her wares. Once vibrant marigolds for temple offerings, now faded to a uniform, dull ochre. He knelt beside her, the red cape pooling in the dust. He picked up a single wilting flower. He focused, not on the destructive potential of his heat vision, but on something deeper, more fundamental. The gentle, nurturing energy of a yellow sun, stored in every cell of his being. It was the energy of life, of growth, of becoming. From his hands, a soft golden glow, no brighter than candlelight, enveloped the dying marigold. The gray receded from the petals like a shadow fleeing dawn. Color returned, not just color, but vibrance. A shocking, luminous orange that seemed to sing against the monochrome world. The texture of the petals plumped, dewy with life. A sweet, peppery scent, the very essence of the flower, burst into the dead air. The old woman, Mrs. Kapoor, gasped. A feeling, long forgotten and buried under layers of existential gray, stirred in her chest. It was wonder. A tear, the first felt in days, traced a clean path through the dust on her cheek. She looked from the flower to the man in blue, and in his eyes she didn't see a god or a savior, but a gardener, a reminder. Superman moved, not in a blur of superspeed, but with deliberate, visible purpose. He was not hiding his methods, he was demonstrating them. He touched a child's toy robot, a thing of dull, leaden gray. Focusing, he poured a sliver of that same solar warmth into it. Gears that were conceptually frozen began to turn. A splash of cherry red and cobalt blue bloomed across its chassis. The child, Arjun, stared. Then a laugh, a real, unfettered sound, bubbled from his lips, a clarion bell in the silent market. Superman breathed gently on a set of wind chimes hanging from a silent doorway. The metal, which had forgotten its purpose to sing, remembered. It tinkled a clear, silver note that hung in the air, a perfect, simple melody of existence. He met the eyes of a shopkeeper, a young man who had been numbly counting gray coins. Superman said nothing, but his gaze held a simple, stubborn defiance. I see you. You are not a statistic. Your story matters. He was not fighting the iconoclast. He was gardening, tending to the individual, fragile blooms of meaning that the entity sought to erase. On the Avengers comms network, a monitor flickered with the psychic and emotional energy readings from Delhi. Tony Stark, watching from orbit, saw the data spike not in a wave of destructive power, but in delicate, localized blossoms of emotional resonance. He's not feeding it a sacrifice, Tony murmured, understanding dawning, stripping the desperation from his voice. He's not giving it the grand, tragic narrative it wants. He's feeding it a better story. But the power output, Bruce Banner said, analyzing the energy signatures. It's subtle but widespread. The bio-solar field he's projecting, it's not sustainable at this rate if he's the sole source. In the Sanctum Sanctorum, Dr. Strange, his hands weaving through astral diagrams, nodded grimly. He isn't the source, Banner. Not really. Look at the mystical resonance. He's a catalyst, a spark. The cloak of levitation understands this better than we do. The cloak itself gave an empathetic ripple. He's reigniting the stories they carry, their memories, their loves, their small, defining moments. He's reminding them of their own meaning, and that meaning is generating the energy. He's reflecting their own light back at them. And so, Superman flew. From the choking gray of Delhi to the melancholic silence of Paris, where he helped a baker named Sophie remember not just the recipe, but the joy of a perfect golden brown baguette, the pride in craft, the smile of a morning customer. He flew to a coastline in Ghana, where a fisherman, Kofi, sat listlessly beside a torn net. Superman didn't fix it with super speed. He sat, took a needle and line, and with painstaking human slowness began to mend a single stitch, then gestured for Kofi to continue. As Kofi's calloused fingers took over, muscle memory awoke, and with it, the story of generations of men who wrestled sustenance from the sea, a story of patience and resilience. He stood alongside firefighters in Tokyo, not to battle a world-ending blaze, but to share a moment of quiet solidarity as they checked their equipment. His presence reminded them of the unspoken narrative of their duty. Courage not as a grand flame, but as a steady, professional ember that refused to go out. Each act was infinitesimally small against a moon-sized entity. But each was a spark, a point of defiant color, a note of resilient sound, a heartbeat of reclaimed feeling in the spreading gray. The iconoclast pulsed in orbit, a ripple of confusion disturbing its perfect nullity. It was being presented with a feast, but not the one it craved. Instead of a single, concentrated narrative of despair, the fall of the hero, it was being offered billions of tiny, bright, indigestible narratives. Stories of mending, not breaking. Of creation, not destruction. Of love, duty, and simple human connection, offered not in resignation, but in stubborn, quiet defiance. These stories had no tragic end, no clean despair to consume. They were open-ended, they were hopeful. To the iconoclast, they were like trying to eat light. The null field began to recede, not in a catastrophic uniform wave, but in patches. Color returned to a single tree in Central Park where a couple had their first kiss. Laughter echoed suddenly from a courtyard in Barcelona where children remembered a game. The gray melted like ice under a scattered, persistent sun. Enraged, the entity abandoned its passive consumption. It focused its entire, terrible being on the catalyst, the source of this narrative resistance. It launched a psychic assault directly at Superman's core, trying to drain the concept of Superman itself. It bombarded him with his own story, twisted into a proof of hope's futility. It showed him Krypton, not in its glory, but in its final, prideful ignorance, its story ending in fire and ash. It replayed Jonathan Kent's heart attack, frame by frame, emphasizing Clark's powerlessness despite all his strength. It dredged up the faces of those he could not save, the 1.4 million of Sokovia among them, a silent, accusing chorus. "See," the static voice hissed, "your hope is a lie, a child's fantasy in a universe of cold equations. You are a story of failure. Let us consume it and be done." Superman, hovering in the thin, cold air of the upper atmosphere, weathered the psychic storm. He did not flinch. He did not deny the images. He let them wash over him, through him. He carried them always. They were the weight that gave his hope its gravity. "You wanted a symbol of hope to sacrifice?" he said, his voice calm, ringing out across the psychic plane like a clarion call, reaching every mind still struggling against the gray. "Here it is. My hope isn't ignorance. It isn't the denial of pain or failure. It's the choice to believe in something more despite them. He turned his face upward, away from the gray moon and towards the distant, brilliant yellow sun. He drew in its radiation, not to fuel his muscles for a final punch, but to ignite his spirit for a final declaration. He became a beacon, not of raw power, but of conviction. The light that erupted from him was not the focused lance of heat vision. It was a sunrise, a wide, diffuse, warm radiance that pushed back the conceptual cold. Hope isn't about knowing the way out, his voice thought echoed across the planet. It's about believing there is a way out, even when every logical path is dark. And I believe in them. Across the world, people looked up. In Delhi, Mrs. Kapoor held her marigold aloft. In Paris, Sophie broke a piece of her bread and shared it. In Ghana, Kofi held up his mended net. In Tokyo, a firefighter nodded to his crew. In small towns and great cities, in homes and in wilderness, they saw the blue and red figure, a tiny silhouette against the gray moon, holding it back not with fists or beams, but with an unwavering, reflected light. And one by one, they remembered. A mother in Stockholm remembered the feel of her newborn's hand gripping her finger. A retired teacher in Mumbai remembered the moment a struggling student's eyes lit up with understanding. A miner in Wales remembered the taste of cool water after a long shift. A teenager in Iowa remembered the perfect, endless possibility of a summer afternoon. They remembered their own stories, their personal, private reasons to hope, to struggle, to love, to continue. This collective, reignited narrative, a universe screaming a defiant yes to its own meaning, coalesced. It was no longer Superman's light alone. It was a billion points of light, a constellation of defiant somethings against the encompassing nothing. This tidal wave of starlight, of reaffirmed existence, rushed upward, not as physical energy, but as a conceptual counterforce. It struck the iconoclast. The entity of negation had no defense against a story it could not consume, a hope it could not corrupt. With a silent, psychic shriek that was the sound of a void being filled, it unraveled. The gray sphere didn't explode. It fragmented into incoherent motes that were then erased by the very reality they sought to negate. The moon-sized blot was simply gone, replaced by the familiar star-dusted black of space. The gray vanished from Earth. The return was not silent, but a joyous, cacophonous riot. Color rushed back, more vivid than memory. Sound returned, a symphony of traffic, wind, conversation, and music that felt like an embrace. Emotion flooded in, a tidal wave of relief, joy, sorrow, love, all the messy, glorious feelings that defined being alive. People wept, laughed, hugged strangers, feeling the weight of their own hearts again, a weight they now cherished. The cost had been immense, but it was a cost of resilience, not of souls. Superman fell, not in a controlled descent, but in a slow, graceful arc, like a leaf detached from its tree. He was not physically wounded, but spiritually and emotionally spent. He had been the conduit for the hopes of a world, and the vessel was empty. The light around him dimmed. His eyes closed. Iron Man, in the Mark 85, shot through the atmosphere like a crimson and gold comet. He caught the falling Kryptonian 1,000 feet above the Pacific, the repulsors whining as he arrested their momentum. "I've got you," Tony said, his voice uncharacterially soft in the private suit channel. "Easy, Big Blue. It's over." On the Quinjet ride back to the Avengers compound, the silence was profound, but it was no longer the silence of despair. It was the silence of awe, of processing a paradigm shift. They had witnessed a man face the ultimate utilitarian trap, the kind of hard choice that filled their own histories and nightmares, and he had refused to play the game. He had not won by being stronger, smarter, or more powerful. He had won by being fundamentally and unchangeably Superman. He had rewritten the rules of the conflict by adhering to his own. He had shown them that in a universe that often demanded blood and compromise, the most rebellious, the most powerful act could be to simply, steadfastly refuse to sacrifice. Hours later, in the medical bay, Superman slept the deep, restorative sleep of the just. The monitors showed his solar reserves slowly, steadily refilling. Tony Stark stood at the observation window, a cup of cold coffee forgotten in his hand. He had shed the armor, but the weight of the day remained, not as a burden, but as a lesson. Steve Rogers joined him, his uniform dirty, his face etched with a new kind of respect. He never even considered it, Tony, not for a second. I know, Tony said, his voice quiet. We were all running the numbers, looking for the third option, the tech solution, the tactical retreat. We kept asking, what's his play? What's the angle? How does the Superman variable factor into the calculus? He shook his head, a humble, awed smile, finally touching his lips as he looked at the sleeping figure. That was it. His play was to have no play, no angle, no calculus. He turned to Steve, the engineer who built solutions and the soldier who made tough calls, both humbled before a different kind of principle. Just a promise, Tony Stark finished. A promise he made to a couple of farmers in Kansas a long time ago. And sometimes I'm starting to think that's the only math that really matters. Outside, the world, in all its noisy, colorful, emotionally messy glory, spun on. Its story continued, not because a price had been paid in blood, but because a price had been refused. And in that refusal, hope had proven itself not a weakness, but the one force a universe of nothing could not withstand. The world did not heal in a day. But in the weeks following the iconoclast's silent defeat, a subtle, profound thaw began, not of ice and rubble, but of the spirit. The long, psychic winter that had settled into the bones of this universe, born from a decade of snap judgments, impossible sacrifices, and Pyrrhic victories, started to recede. And Superman did not leave. He stayed. He stayed not as a savior hovering above, but as a man working beside. He helped clear the last of the psychic debris from Manhattan's streets, his heat vision carefully slicing through twisted metal that threatened to topple. He spent an afternoon in the ruins of a small town in Sokovia, listening to an old woman's memories of her son, not with pity, but with a patience that felt like a gift. He flew medical supplies to remote S.H.I.E.L.D. outposts and, on one memorable occasion, helped the Guardians of the Galaxy corral a fleeing, terrified space whale that had been displaced during the chaos, guiding it gently back to the stratosphere with a reassuring hand on its barnacled flank. The debates about him, the editorials, the news panels, the furious underground forums, continued, but their tenor changed. The fear, the suspicion, the geopolitical panic softened into a global conversation. He was no longer an unknowable, absolute variable in an already unstable equation. He was the man who had carried a wounded Asgardian child 3 miles to a medic. He was the figure seen quietly replanting the trampled flowers in a park in London the morning after the final battle. He was the alien who, when the universe itself had threatened to unravel into despair, had chosen to tend a garden. Before his departure, he sought a final conversation with each of them. They were not grand pronouncements, but quiet moments of clarity, where the people who carried the weight of this world saw themselves reflected in the light of a different sun, with Tony Stark in the workshop. The air smelled of ozone and old oil. Tony was meticulously deconstructing a shattered iconoclast sensor, its once gleaming surface now dull and cracked. He didn't look up as the red cape entered his periphery. "You know," Tony said, his voice uncharacteristically devoid of its usual performative edge, "I built my first suit in a cave, out of scraps, to protect myself. Then I built better ones to protect others. Then the world. Then everything. The armor got thicker, the systems more complex, the AI smarter. I layered contingency on contingency." He tapped a tool against the arc reactor glowing in his chest. The light shimmered on his focused, tired face. "I always thought the protection was in the metal, in the code, in the next upgrade. The bigger gun, the stronger alloy." He finally set the tool down and looked at Superman, his eyes sharp and weary. "You showed me it's in the heart of the thing, the core principle. The one piece I can't forge, can't buy, and can't reverse engineer. It's infuriatingly simple." Superman leaned against a workbench. "It's the only piece that matters, Tony. Everything else is just a tool." "Yeah," Stark sighed, a wry, almost reluctant smile touching his lips. "Took a guy from another universe to show me the blueprint for my own reactor." With Steve Rogers at the Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C., the marble was cool and flawless under the gray afternoon sky. Names stretched into infinity, a silent testament to cost. Steve stood before a particular panel, his broad shoulders squared, but his posture heavy. He placed a hand, flat and gentle, against one etched name. "I've spent my life fighting for what's right," he said, his voice low and steady. "Duty, honor, the shield." Sometimes that meant making terrible choices, choosing which hill to hold, which bridge to blow, which friend to oppose. He took a slow breath. "I thought that was the burden, carrying the weight of those impossible decisions. That being a good soldier, a good man, meant being willing to make the terrible choice so others wouldn't have to." He turned to face Superman, his blue eyes clear and searching. "You showed me the harder fight isn't just making the choice. It's the fight before the choice. It's fighting to keep believing that a choice doesn't have to be terrible. That with enough will, enough heart, enough hope, you can find a third option, a better way. That's a courage I'm still learning. It's scarier than any battlefield." "It's the only fight worth winning, Steve," Superman said softly, "and you've never walked away from a fight in your life." With Thor in New Asgard, the fishing village was alive with sound, the cry of gulls, the lap of waves, and the joyous shouts of children chasing each other across the rocky shore. Human and Asgardian youngsters were intertwined in a game of tag, their laughter indistinguishable. Thor watched from a large, weathered stone, a contented quiet about him, Mjolnir resting at his feet like a loyal hound. "A king provides for his people," Thor rumbled, his gaze fixed on the playing children. "Safety, sustenance, a legacy, a future. I thought that required a crown, an army, a throne carved from the heart of a star. I thought it meant being the strongest, the loudest, the first and last line of defense. He picked up a smooth pebble, turning it over in his palm. You rule nothing. You claim no throne, command no armies, yet you provide the one thing most easily forgotten in the struggle to survive, the light to see by. The reminder of why we survive, not just for tomorrow's battle, but for tomorrow's peace, for moments like this. He gestured with the pebble to the children. That is a kingship of its own, Superman. One not of dominion, but of inspiration. My father would have admired it greatly. Your father, Superman said, joining him in watching the game, would be proud of the king his son has become. One who understands that a kingdom's true strength is in its people's laughter, not just in its walls. With Doctor Strange on the balcony of the Sanctum Sanctorum, New York traffic flowed below like a river of light and sound, a mundane miracle of order. Stephen Strange stood with his hands clasped behind his back, the cloak of levitation still around his shoulders. He watched the city with the detached focus of a surgeon or a sorcerer. Reality has rules, Strange began, his voice measured and precise. Laws of physics, of magic, of cause and effect. For every action, a reaction. For every spell, a cost. For every saved life, a potential temporal paradox. I've spent years learning these rules, enforcing them, bending them, and occasionally breaking them to avert a greater catastrophe. I viewed the cosmos as a vast, intricate machine, beautiful in its precision, terrifying in its inflexibility. He glanced sideways at Superman. You introduced a new variable, not a break in the rules, not chaos, but a living proof that within the existing framework, there is more flexibility, more grace than I had ever dared to believe. You operate on a principle that seems to bypass certain cosmic equations, not by breaking them, but by fulfilling a higher order of them. Perhaps the greatest magic isn't in defying reality, but in believing, utterly and completely in its hidden potential for kindness. It's a paradigm I had not adequately considered. It's not magic, Stephen, Superman said. It's choice, the same choice any of us can make. Precisely, Strange replied, a faint, intellectual smile on his lips. And that is the most astonishing spell of all. With Natasha Romanoff in a quiet, nondescript safe house. The room was bare but clean. Natasha moved with efficient grace, preparing 2 cups of tea. The steam rose in fragile wisps. Trust is a weapon, she said, her back to him as she worked. The most delicate one in the arsenal. You have to clean it, maintain it, know its tolerances. Use it too carelessly, it fails. Use it too rarely, it seizes up. I've seen it fail more times than it holds. I've failed it myself. She brought the cups to the small table, sitting opposite him. Her green eyes were calm, analytical, but not cold. You use trust like it's your first time, every time. You offer it freely before it's earned. You assume the best, even when history screams otherwise. By every metric of tradecraft, every lesson from my life, it shouldn't work. It's a vulnerability, a fatal one. She took a sip of her tea, then met his gaze. A faint, genuine smile, one that reached her eyes, appeared. But it does work. It's disarming, in a good way. It makes people want to be worthy of it. It's a tactic I could never replicate, because for me, it would be a tactic. For you, it's just truth. It's the only way forward, Natasha, Superman said, warming his hands on the cup. One honest moment at a time. With Nick Fury on the bridge of the helicarrier. The global map glowed, threats flickering and slowly fading from red to yellow to a steady, vigilant blue. Fury stood before it, his lone eye scanning the continents, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The hum of the ship was a constant presence. I've spent my entire career preparing for the worst, Fury stated, his voice a low gravel. Because in my experience, the worst doesn't just come. It RSVPs, brings friends, and kicks in the door. I build shields, assemble teams, devise contingencies for contingencies. You are a walking strategic nightmare. Uncontrollable power, unshakable, simplistic morals, public adoration on a global scale, a potential single point of failure for the entire species. He finally turned, his eye locking onto Superman with laser intensity. For weeks, I ran scenarios: how to counter you, how to contain you, what to do if you went sideways. But that wasn't the real threat you posed. He took a step closer. The real threat was that you made me hope I was wrong. You made me look at my worst case scenarios and wonder if maybe, just maybe, we could aim for a best case outcome instead. You made hope a viable strategic asset instead of a liability. And for a guy like me, who's built a life, a organization, on being right about the darkness, that's terrifying. Superman held his gaze. The darkest nights need the sharpest eyes, director, but even the sharpest eyes can learn to look for the dawn. Fury gave a single, slow nod, the ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile touching his mouth. Maybe. Don't be a stranger. We'll leave a light on. Superman listened to them all. He did not preach. He did not try to convert them to his worldview. He simply was who he was, a calm, steady presence. And in that presence, each hero saw a reflection of their own deepest ideals, the pure, uncorrupted versions of the principles that had first set them on their paths before the compromises, the losses, and the hard necessities had etched their lines. The day of departure arrived not with a bang, but with a gentle realignment. The dimensional instability that had brought him there, a quiet, lingering echo of the iconoclast's passage, finally stabilized into a single, shimmering doorway. A portal of gentle, gold-tinged light swirling like liquid autumn. It manifested not in a lab or a sanctum, but in the middle of a sun-drenched, wind-swept field in Kansas. The symmetry was not lost on him. The Avengers and several others gathered to see him off. There was no grand ceremony, no medals, no speeches for the cameras. Just a group of warriors, scholars, and spies standing together in the tall grass, forever changed by an encounter with a different kind of strength. The offer stands, Tony said, gesturing vaguely toward the sky. A Quinjet, a comlink, a spare suit with a big S on it, just in case you get bored over there. Superman smiled, that warm, easy smile that had become so familiar. I think you have everything you need right here. Will we see you again? Steve asked, his expression open and honest. Superman looked at the shimmering portal, then back at the horizon, at this scarred, beautiful, stubborn, endlessly resilient world. I hope so, but not because you need saving. He met the eyes of the assembled heroes, because I'd like to visit friends. He moved among them, a firm, respectful handshake with Captain America, a meeting of unwavering gazes, a subtle, understanding nod with the Black Widow, a powerful forearm clasp with Thor, a gesture of warriors and kings, a final, long, silent look with Doctor Strange, a wordless exchange between keepers of impossible truths, a brief, surprisingly heartfelt hug from Tony Stark, who quickly coughed and pretended to adjust a gauntlet. Then he turned and stepped toward the light. He paused at the threshold, the golden glow washing over the red and blue of his suit. He turned back one last time, his face solemn yet bright. "This universe taught me that hope can be heavy," he said, his voice carrying clearly on the breeze. "It can cost. It can be a burden that leaves calluses on the soul. But you taught me it can also be shared, that its weight lessens when more shoulders choose to bear it. Don't just be survivors of what comes, be believers in what can be, in each other." He stepped through. The portal collapsed inward with a soft, gentle sound, like the sigh of wind through ripe wheat, and was gone. The heroes stood in the field, silent for a long moment, the only sound the rustling grass and the distant call of a crow. The space where he had been felt both empty and curiously full. Weeks later, the Caucasus Mountains. A rogue state, leveraging stolen Chitauri energy cores, had fortified a mountain base. They held hostages, threatened a regional capital, and their leader was broadcasting fanatical promises of a new world order. The old, brutal calculus presented itself to the Avengers on their tactical screens, a surgical, overwhelming strike from the air. It would neutralize the threat, destroy the cores, and end the crisis. Estimated collateral casualties: 40, 60 civilian workers and prisoners. Acceptable losses. The only play. Tony Stark in the Mark Lilith X5 hovered high above the cloud cover, the target painted clearly in his HUD. He heard the old voice in his head, the voice of cold logic, of New York, of Sokovia, of Titan. The right play, the only play. Minimize the larger threat, save the greater number. His repulsors hummed, ready to deliver the swift, terrible solution. He looked at the data, the heat signatures in the prison block, the structural layout of the base's sickbay. He looked down through the clouds and saw, via drone feed, Steve Rogers on the ground, already leading a covert team to evacuate a nearby village, personally carrying an elderly woman from her home. He saw the stubborn, unwavering commitment to the one, not just the many. The old voice faltered. "New plan." Tony's voice crackled over the comms. It was different. Not the flippant genius or the anguished commander, but something calmer, steadier. "We're doing this the hard way. Banner, you on standby? I need a pinpoint, non-lethal EMP burst. I'm sending you the grid coordinates. You need to disable the main power conduit and the weapon systems, but you have a 3-meter margin of error. You cannot hit the field hospital's backup generator. Thor, I need you on my mark. Not a lightning strike, a localized, sustained lightning storm right above the main courtyard. Maximum visual and audio disruption, minimum structural damage. Think theatrical, not tactical." There was a beat of stunned silence on the channel. "Natasha, Clint," Tony continued, his fingers flying over a holographic interface as he rerouted suit power to scanning systems. "You have a 90-second window once the lights go out and the thunder starts. New ingress point is being sent to you now. You will extract the 23 high-value prisoners from the East Block command bunker. We are not blowing it up. We are taking it and them intact." "Tony," Steve's voice came through, cautious but not dismissive. "That's a 3-phase, high-risk, synchronized operation with zero room for error. The simpler approach is simpler," Tony finished for him, "but it's not right. It's not the only way." He took a breath, hovering in the silent sky. "It's the way that saves everyone. Let's prove it's possible." Another silence, this one charged with a new energy. "I can do the EMP," Banner's voice came, thoughtful and focused. The calibration is tricky, but yes, I have the shot. The storm shall be magnificent, Thor boomed, enthusiasm cutting through the tension. We're in position, Natasha confirmed, her voice all business, but with a thread of something like anticipation. Ready on your mark. The operation was messier. It was harder. It took longer. It required breathtaking feats of precision and trust. Thor's storm was a masterpiece of controlled fury, dazzling the guards. Banner's EMP pulse was a scalpel, not a club. Natasha and Clint became ghosts in the thunder, liberating the prisoners. Steve's team secured the perimeter, neutralizing guards with non-lethal force. Tony himself dove into the heart of the base, not with missiles blazing, but with hacking tools and containment fields, personally wrestling the unstable Chitauri cores into neutralization chambers. When the dust and the last echoes of thunder settled, the threat was neutralized. The leader was in custody. The stolen tech was secured. The casualty report, after a thorough scan, read 0. Standing in the smoldering but largely intact ruins of the enemy base, surrounded by freed prisoners and S.H.I.E.L.D. cleanup crews, Steve Rogers pulled off his helmet. He looked across the courtyard at Tony Stark, whose armor was scorched and dented in new places. Tony's faceplate hissed open. His hair was sweaty, his face smudged with soot. But the grin on his face wasn't just the adrenaline of victory. It was quieter, deeper, a grin of profound realization. Steve walked over, extending a hand. Tony grasped it, not in a handshake, but in a firm, mutual grip. See? Tony said, his voice husky but clear. No play, just a promise. Steve nodded, his own smile breaking through. Took you long enough to figure it out. Had to wait for a good teacher, Tony retorted. But there was no bite, only gratitude. On the other side of the universe, in another city that never slept. Clark Kent sat at his desk at the Daily Planet, the soft glow of his computer screen illuminating his glasses. He was typing up a story about a new community center opening in the west side of Metropolis, funded by an anonymous donor. The prose was clean, hopeful, focusing on the after-school programs and the community garden. He paused, looking out the window at the skyline of his city. The sun was setting, painting the towers in hues of orange and purple. Below, the traffic flowed. People hurried home, lives intertwined in their own complex dance of joy and struggle. This world had its own scars. The ghost of Zod's invasion, the political fractures, the petty cruelties and large injustices. It had its own compromises. But it was home. He had not fixed the Marvel universe. He had not arrived as a savior and departed as a conqueror of despair. And it, in turn, with all its grit and pain and weary wisdom, had not broken him. They had changed each other. He carried back with him a sobering, crucial knowledge that hope could have a price, a tangible weight you felt in your bones after a loss, a weight he would carry forever from experiences both here and there. It was not a naive concept, but a conscious, sometimes costly choice. And they carried with them the memory, now etched into their methodology, that the price wasn't always mandatory. That the hard choice was sometimes a failure of imagination, not a requirement of heroism. That sometimes the most difficult, most rebellious act in a cynical cosmos was to simply, stubbornly, choose to find a way to save everyone. He had not come to be their Messiah. He had come for a brief, bright, impossible season to be their reminder, a living echo of their own first best selves. And in a universe where victory had always, always cost something, A sacrifice, a life, a piece of one's soul. Earth's mightiest heroes had learned a new arithmetic. They had learned that the most precious thing to spend was not a life, but a chance on a better way, a chance on trust, a chance on the stubborn, illogical, revolutionary power of hope. Clark saved his article, titled it A Place to Grow, and sent it to Perry. He stood up, took off his glasses, and walked to the window. Somewhere out there, in the infinite tapestry of realities, his friends were fighting their good fight, their way. And here he would fight his. He smiled, a small, private smile, and turned back to his desk. There was always more work to do.